So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to So we are back with a brand new movie on What If Harry Potter Fell in Love with a Stunning Serpent Goddess? But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. English town was blowing over her scales as she silently slithered through the air on invisible strands of power. If anyone saw the massive Serpent moving through the air like it was swimming in water, they didn't notice or care as most were sleeping. Not many in the non-magical world could see her anyway as she moved through the night, using magic to stay in the air without needing to use a more cumbersome broom. The serpent was coiling in the air as she frowned before moving with lightning speed to avoid a flying motorcycle passing her by before it landed on the street below. Of course, this wasn't how her day even started at all. In fact, it had been a lot quieter a few days ago, when she arrived in the customs using a very powerful illusion that easily fooled the customs witch, slithering into London before taking to the sky with a simple spell, making sure her disillusionment charm was still active as she moved her self through the streets like everyone else. She had come back to Britain to visit the father of a friend of hers, Aberforth, before returning on her way to see the jungles of South America. However, after getting an apartment with a balcony in the non-magical world, she had left to see what was going on in the magical world itself. She flew around before moving her illusion into the hidden alleyway that was Diagon Alley. Moving through the shops and stores before leaving, she avoided any goblin-run establishments due to their rather high-end security, her preference being that of dwarves. The northern lands are of Naga-run businesses of the Asian continents for keeping her money safe. She soon headed towards the Highlands of Scotland to visit Aberforth, reapplying the warming charms across her body. Being nearly 28 feet in length and twice the size of a man's thigh was rather annoying to Nagini, the former maledictus using her tail tip as a surrogate wand. It didn't help that as a magical witch turned serpent, wand usage was a rather big problem. So, she had learned to use her tail tip as a substitute. Thankfully, she didn't have the problems other maledictus had, which was loss of intelligence or magic in the case of witches. However, she had been too far along in her curse to be able to change back into a human. She remembered who helped her find the man that cursed her mother for not becoming his mistress. Gellert Grindelwald had diverted his network to help her find the man before she forced him to remove the blood curse on her. However, the curse had been in her body for far too long and she would eventually get stuck as a human. There was very little room for a witch that was stuck in a serpent body, if you looked in places like Britain or England specifically. Places like the magical communities of India accepted serpents as a part of their culture and even revered parselmouths for their ability to communicate with the serpents. Nagini flew in slow, lazy spirals over the quiet streets of Little Whinging, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. The night carried scents of damp pavement, chimney smoke, and the acrid tang of lingering magic. Below her, the streetlights bathed the tidy houses in a sterile orange glow, their warmth swallowed by the biting November air. The cold did not trouble her, not with the warming charms woven seamlessly into her scales. But she wondered how a human child would fare in such conditions. Her dark eyes narrowed as she observed the figures gathered on the doorstep of number 4, Privet Drive. Even at a distance, the presence of Albus Dumbledore was unmistakable. His aura, like a beacon, pulsed against the night. Beside him, a tabby cat shimmered and stretched into the form of Minerva McGonagall, her expression stern and disapproving. And then there was the half-giant, Hagrid, cradling a bundle of cloth against his chest as if it were the most delicate thing in the world. Nagini's body tightened mid-air as she watched Hagrid kneel, placing the bundle on the doorstep. Even from above, she could feel the faint hum of magic emanating from the child within. It was a curious thing, the power nestled in such a small body. Raw and untamed, she watched as Dumbledore tucked a letter against the cloth, stepping back with the solemn air of a man who had just placed a burden too great upon shoulders too small. For several moments, they lingered. Then, with quiet words exchanged, they left McGonagall first, shifting back into feline form and disappearing into the darkness, followed by Dumbledore, who vanished with a near-silent crack. Hagrid took the longest to leave, his great shoulders trembling before he mounted the enchanted motorcycle and took off into the sky. Nagini descended. She moved without sound, The unnatural grace of a creature neither fully beast nor fully witch guiding her to the ground. The wind stirred as she landed, coils shifting over concrete, her head lowering to peer at the bundle. The child. The boy's scent was faint, but distinct. There was something of old magic in it, something not entirely unfamiliar. Nagini hesitated, tongue flickering. He smelled of fire and sorrow, of power unshaped. She brushed the cloth away with the tip of her nose, revealing a small, pale face framed by dark hair. A lightning bolt-shaped wound marred his forehead, the edges raw and angry. She could feel the lingering magic there, the echoes of a killing curse, the shattered remains of something else. Something inside her twisted. She had never cared for humans, not truly. Her former life had been taken from her by one, her existence reshaped by their cruelty. She had left Britain for that reason, had sought the places where beings like her, those trapped between worlds, could live without fear. And yet, here was this child, alone in the cold, abandoned on the doorstep of people who smelled of dust and stale contempt. She had passed over many orphans in her life, had ignored the pleas of the helpless. What was one more? And yet, Nagini shifted, her massive form curling protectively around the boy. He did not wake. He only shivered slightly in his sleep, his small hands clenching unconsciously at the air. She saw herself in him. Not as she was now, but as she had been, the girl abandoned to a curse, the girl left to suffer because no one had cared enough to save her in time. A low hiss escaped her throat. No, she would not leave him. With a flick of her tail, she wove the magic she had honed for years, unseen and unnoticed by the wizards who dismissed her kind. The air shimmered as the child lifted into the sky, weightless, cradled by an invisible force. She laced the warming charms through the air around him, ensuring the cold would not touch his fragile body. Then, without another moment's hesitation, she took off. She did not look back. The houses of Little Whinging shrank beneath her, the neatly trimmed streets fading into darkness as she carried the boy beyond the town. Beyond England itself, she flew swiftly, crossing the night sky like a whisper, her mind already turning to the question of where to go, how to keep him safe. He would never know the name Potter, at least not yet, not until he was older. He would never be left on a doorstep again. He was hers now. Nagini slipped soundlessly through the balcony doors of her small apartment, the wards around it parting briefly to allow her entrance. The air inside was warmer, carrying the faint scent of parchment, ink, and the lingering spices from a meal she had prepared days ago but never finished. The room was sparse, its furnishings chosen for practicality rather than comfort: a low table, a few cushions, and books stacked neatly in a corner. She had never needed much. The beside her, still cocooned in the warmth of her magic, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He had not stirred during the journey, his body exhausted from whatever strange magic had saved him. She eased him down onto a blanket she coiled around to form a makeshift nest, ensuring the warmth did not fade. For a moment, she only watched him, her mind already racing ahead. She could not stay here. The wizards of Britain would be looking for him soon, and though they would not think to search in the Muggle world immediately, it was only a matter of time before rumors spread. No, she needed to leave England entirely. And quickly. But where? India would welcome her, but its magical communities were deeply intertwined. A new arrival with a child, especially one as magically powerful as this, would not go unnoticed. The Naga clans would shelter her, but they would ask questions. Too many questions. Southeast Asia, perhaps. The forests of Thailand or Vietnam, where magic wove through the land itself. Ancient and untamed, there were temples hidden from the eyes of non-magical folk, places where serpents were revered, where the knowledge of Parseltongue was not feared but honored. Yes, that would do. But then there was the matter of the child himself. Nagini slithered closer, lowering her head to peer at him. His face was peaceful now, slack with sleep, but she knew that would not last. Infants were fragile creatures, wholly dependent on others for survival. She had no hands to cradle him, no human voice to soothe him. How could she, trapped in this form, care for him properly? She had seen human mothers in her travels, fussing over their young with a care she could not mimic. He would need food, warmth, comfort, all things she could provide in her own way, but never as easily as a human could. Had she made a mistake? Her coils tensed slightly at the thought, uncertainty creeping in where resolve had been. Then, a small noise. A soft murmur, followed by a faint wriggle. Nagini stilled as the child's tiny green eyes fluttered open, unfocused and dazed from sleep. He blinked at her, his mouth opening as if to cry. And then he hissed. A soft, wordless babble, no. Different from any other infant's gurgling, but to her ears, it was unmistakable. Parseltongue. Nagini recoiled in shock, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. The boy blinked again, his little face scrunching in confusion at her reaction, before he made the sound again, a string of meaningless syllables, yet clear as day in the language of serpents. He was speaking to her. She let out an instinctive, cautious hiss in return, a simple sound of acknowledgement. The child responded immediately, his tiny hands waving as if in excitement. He did not seem frightened by her, nor confused by the language that left his lips so naturally. Understanding dawned on her slowly, like the first rays of morning light over the horizon. She would never need to worry about miscommunication. He could understand her. A slow, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest, something ancient and primal. Connection. Recognition. She had taken him in on impulse, thinking only to prevent another soul from being abandoned as she had once been. But now, she realized, this was something far greater. This boy Harry was hers in a way she had never expected. And she would make sure he would never be alone again. With renewed certainty, Nagini curled protectively around him, her mind already shifting to the preparations she would need to make. She would find food for him in the morning, gather supplies before leaving this place behind. For now, though, she simply rested, listening to the quiet hissing of the child beside her. Her son. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Nagini's apartment, casting a pale glow over the small space. The warmth inside was a sharp contrast to the cold English air outside, but Nagini hardly noticed. Her focus was on the small bundle nestled within the crook of her coiled body. Harry Potter, her son now, she reminded herself, was awake, his bright green eyes blinking up at her with curiosity. He had been remarkably quiet since waking, save for the occasional hissing babble that had fascinated her more than she cared to admit. He was a parselmouth, a rarity even among wizards. That alone would make him a curiosity to those who knew what to look for. He needed food. That was her first priority. Using the tip of her tail, she levitated a bottle of milk she had retrieved from the muggle shop nearby. Magic made the process easier, though she found the act strangely grounding. She had never cared for another being in this way before. As he latched onto the bottle, drinking greedily, she watched him carefully. He was small, but strong. His magic thrummed beneath his skin, raw and untamed. A powerful child, and one she needed to keep far away from those who would seek to control him. As he fed, she turned her attention to the maps and books she had gathered in preparation for their departure. Her gaze flickered over the pages, considering her options. Southeast Asia had been her first thought, a land LLED with hidden temples and deep forests, but the more she thought about it, the less ideal it became. The jungles of Vietnam and Thailand were dangerous, not only because of the wildlife but because of the scars left by war. The land itself had suffered, soaked in blood and conflict. Magic there was unpredictable, wild and unstable. No, it was too great a risk. Her gaze drifted across the room, settling on a worn, dog-eared copy of the Jungle Book, left forgotten among the few books she had gathered over the years. India. The thought struck her with surprising clarity. The jungles of India were vast and ancient, filled with magic older than Britain itself. The people there did not fear serpents the way Western wizards did. In some places, they were worshipped, revered as symbols of wisdom and power. She would not need to hide as much, would not need to strain herself maintaining an illusionary human form for long periods. More than that, India was stable. The magical communities there were deeply rooted, their traditions strong. It was a place where she could disappear, where she could raise Harry away from prying eyes. Yes, India was the right choice. But the real question was how to get there. The British Ministry of Magic would soon realize that the boy was missing. The ICW, International Confederation of Wizards, might even get involved once they realized it was no ordinary kidnapping. They would be searching, watching for any sign of him. Traveling by magical means was risky. Portkeys, apparition, or international flow. Travel would all leave traces. The Muggle world, however, might offer safer alternatives. A ship, perhaps. It would take longer, but it was discreet. Airports were too tightly monitored, even in the Muggle world. But the sea was vast, and wizards rarely paid attention to Muggle shipping routes. Yes, that would do. She would secure passage on a vessel heading east, hiding in the cargo hold, keeping Harry close. It would be difficult, but it was safer than leaving magical traces behind. As she coiled protectively around Harry, she felt a sense of determination settle over her. They would leave soon, and once they reached India, she would make sure that no one, not Dumbledore, not the Ministry, not the remnants of Voldemort's followers, would ever take him from her. The air at the dockyard was thick with the scent of salt and oil. The distant hum of ship engines blending with the occasional shouts of workers. Nagini slithered silently along the damp pavement, her body concealed beneath layers of carefully woven disillusionment charms. Harry, wrapped in a sling secured to her back by magic, remained warm and hidden under the same enchantments. His breathing was steady, his small body relaxed against her scales. She had spent hours searching, gliding unnoticed through the labyrinth of towering shipping containers and stacks of cargo, scanning the transport schedules posted on the dockmaster were bound for Europe, Africa, or the Americas, but finally, she had found what she needed: a freighter departing for Mumbai within the hour. Perfect. Moving with quiet precision, she made her way toward the vessel, careful to avoid the workers bustling around the loading zone. Muggle sailors and dock hands paid no mind to the shifting air around them, unaware of the massive serpent weaving unseen through their midst. But it wasn't the Muggles she was worried about. Wizards were here. She caught sight of them near the customs office, 3 men in plain Muggle clothing, their postures too stiff, their eyes scanning the crowds with sharp intent. Aurors, most likely. Their presence confirmed what she had already suspected. The Ministry knew Harry was missing. She pressed herself against the cold steel of a cargo container, ling herself to stillness as the wizards moved closer. One of them, a thin man with dark hair, pulled out a pocket watch, tapping it with his wand. Still nothing, he muttered to his companions. They could be anywhere by now. Another grumbled. This is a waste of time. If the kid was taken out of Britain, it wasn't by boat. Orders are orders, the first replied. They want every major port checked. Just keep looking. Nagini did not breathe, did not move. She had masked her magical signature well, but paranoia was a survival instinct she had never quite abandoned. Slowly, carefully, she slithered backward, moving along the edge of the dock toward the ship's loading ramp. One of the workers shouted something, and the oars turned, distracted. That was her chance. With silent precision, she slipped through the shadows, her massive form weaving through crates and barrels. The ship loomed ahead, its gangway briefly unguarded as a dockhand stepped away to check the cargo manifest. With one final, fluid motion, she crossed the distance and vanished into the freighter's hold just as the worker returned. Safe. For now. Inside, the cargo hold was dimly lit, the scent of wood, metal, and spices heavy in the air. Crates of goods were stacked high, some marked with shipping codes, others with faded foreign script. She moved deeper into the shadows, curling around a space near the FAR wall where she could remain undisturbed. Only when she was certain they were alone did she release the disillusionment charms. The air shimmered, revealing her coils and the small child resting securely against her back. They had done it. They were leaving England behind. With a satisfied hiss, Nagini adjusted Harry's position, ensuring he was still warm and comfortable. As the ship's engines rumbled to life and the vibrations beneath them signaled departure, she allowed herself to relax for the first time in days. India awaited. The Ministry of Magic's Auror department was never quiet, but today, the tension in the air was palpable. Papers shuffled, boots clanked against the stone floors, and whispered conversations hummed like static in the background. The search for Harry Potter was underway, and every Auror knew that failure was not an option. In a dimly lit office deep within the department, Senior Auror Alistair, mad-eye, moody, sat behind his desk, his mismatched eyes one normal, one a whirling enchanted blue orb fixed on the 3 young Aurors standing before him. His face, lined with scars and hardened by years of battle, was unreadable as he listened to their report. Beside him, his trainee, Amelia Bones, stood with her arms crossed, her sharp eyes betraying her concern. Well, Moody's voice was low, gruff. Tell me you found something useful. The three Muggle-born aurors, freshly recruited from the war's aftermath, exchanged uneasy glances before one of them, a wiry man named David Fletcher, stepped forward. No sign of Potter at the docks, sir, he admitted. We checked every ship bound for anywhere outside of Britain, even the ones heading for the continent. If the kid was taken out of the country, they didn't use the ports. Moody grunted, his eyes spinning wildly as if seeking something unseen. And you're certain of that? Fletcher hesitated for only a second. As certain as we can be, sir. Whoever took him didn't leave magical traces. Either they're damn good, or they used a method we weren't looking for. Moody's fingers tapped against the wooden desk in thought, his expression unreadable. Across from him, Amelia Bones frowned. What about the Muggle authorities? She asked. Any reports of suspicious activity? The second auror, a stocky woman named Marissa Cole, shook her head. Nothing specific. The Muggles are as clueless as we are. But, she trailed off, exchanging another glance with her companions. Moody's good eye narrowed. Spit it out. The third auror, a dark-skinned wizard named Raj Patel, cleared his throat. It's not direct evidence, sir. But I did overhear something odd while asking around. He hesitated, then continued. Some dockworkers mentioned rumors of a massive snake sighted near London a few days before you know who fell. At first, I thought it was just Muggle nonsense, some drunken sailor's tale, but a few of them swore up and down that it was real. A serpent longer than a man is tall, moving through the streets like a shadow. Moody's expression didn't change, but Amelia stiffened beside him. A snake, she repeated. That's unusual. Moody's fingers stopped tapping. His gaze was sharp, calculating. You're saying someone saw a bloody snake slithering around London, right before the Dark Lord was taken down? Patel nodded. Yes, sir. And the way they described it, it wasn't normal. It moved like it was flying. And no one could track where it went. Some of the Muggle witnesses claimed it just vanished into thin air. The room fell silent. Moody leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His enchanted eye whirled, locking onto Patel. That's not Muggle nonsense, he muttered. That's a bloody maledictus. Amelia's eyes widened slightly. You think it could be connected? Moody grunted. A dark wizard falls, and days before that, a bloody great snake is seen near the capital. And now Potter's missing. Coincidence isn't a word I like to use, Bones. He pushed himself up from his chair, grabbing his staff. I want every file we have on known maledictuses. Any reports of one operating in Britain, any connections to the Dark Lord. If this is our lead, we follow it. The three aurors nodded quickly, already moving toward the door. Moody turned to Amelia. Get me anything the unspeakables have on blood curses. If that was a maledictus, and if she took the boy, I want to know why. Amelia swallowed her unease and nodded. As the aurors hurried out, Moody's expression darkened. He didn't believe in accidents. Something or someone had taken Harry Potter. And if there was a serpent involved, then the game had only just begun. As his trainees all knew, constant vigilance. The cargo hold of the ship was dimly lit, the rhythmic hum of the engine a constant presence beneath them. Nagini lay curled in a secluded corner, her coils forming a secure nest around Harry, who rested comfortably against her smooth scales. He was wide awake, tiny fingers occasionally grasping at the air as he listened with rapt attention. His fascination pleased her. She had always been alone in her ability to speak the language of serpents, but now, with this child, she had someone who understood. Someone who listened. Her voice came as a low, melodic hiss, the words winding through the air like a whispered spell. Thus, swiftly and surely, the primeval forces of the jungle closed upon the cabin in the clearing. The snakes slithered unseen in the undergrowth, the great cats watched from the trees, and above them all, the apes moved as one, their kingdom undisturbed. Harry let out a quiet, gurgling hiss of his own, his bright green eyes shining with delight. He did not fully understand the words, not yet, but he felt them. The cadence, the rhythm, the soothing nature of her voice, it all held his attention. She continued, slowly and deliberately, letting the jungle of the story unfold around them. The beasts of the wild grew not in the cradle of men, but in the embrace of the forest. His lullabies sung by the rustling leaves and the distant roars of the hunt. A fitting tale. As she spoke, her mind was elsewhere, carefully considering their escape. They were drawing closer to India with each passing hour, and she could not afford mistakes. The ship was large, but Muggles were observant in their own way, and slipping away unnoticed would require careful planning. Her disillusionment charm had served her well thus far, and it would be her first line of defense. With both herself and Harry invisible, they could move unseen through the ship. The featherweight charm, combined with a controlled levitation spell, would allow her to move without making a sound, gliding through the air as if she were nothing more than a shadow. But what if something went wrong? She needed alternatives. Option 1. The cargo nets. She had seen the way the ship was unloaded at port. Crates were lifted by large nets and swung onto the docks. If she timed it correctly, she could slip into one of these nets, hiding among the cargo as it was transferred. Risky, but feasible. Option 2. The mooring ropes. The thick ropes used to secure the ship to the dock could serve as an escape route. Once night fell and the crew's attention was elsewhere, she could slither down, unseen, into the shadows of the port. Option 3. The lifeboats. Muggle ships carried emergency lifeboats, stored along the sides of the deck. If she could detach one and guide it away under cover of darkness, she and Harry could reach shore unnoticed. She would decide when the time came. Flexibility was key. For now, she returned to the book, lowering her head so that Harry could nestle against the warmth of her scales. His little hands rested against her, his soft hissing noises slowing as sleep began to claim him. Thus, the jungle whispered to him, teaching him its secrets, and he listened as one of its own. Nagini's voice softened. She would teach this child, too, not just the ways of the jungle, but the ways of survival. For he was hers, and she would protect him no matter what it took. Minerva McGonagall's hands trembled as she unfolded the morning edition of the Daily Prophet, her sharp eyes scanning the bold, glaring headline. The boy WHO lived missing. By Tadnell Ryder. In a shocking revelation, the Ministry of Magic has confirmed that Harry Potter, the boy who lived, has disappeared. From his relative's home at number 4, Privet Drive. Aurors have been dispatched across the country, but as of yet, no leads have surfaced regarding the young wizard's whereabouts. Senior Auror Alistair Moody, heading the investigation, has refused to comment, but sources within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement report growing concerns that this may be the work of surviving Death Eaters or worse, a foreign power seeking to use the boy for their own ends. With tensions high and the public demanding answers, the ministry remains in a state of uproar, scrambling to uncover the truth behind the disappearance of Britain's most famous child. Minerva barely managed to keep from crushing the paper in her grip. Damn you, Albus. Her lips pressed into a thin, furious line as she forced herself to set the newspaper down, smoothing out the wrinkles where her fingers had clenched too tightly. She could feel her Scottish temper rising, a heat burning in her chest as she fought the urge to storm straight to Dumbledore's office and give the man the verbal lashing of a lifetime. This disaster was exactly what she had feared. She had told Albus it was a terrible idea to leave the boy with those dreadful muggles. She had warned him, pleaded with him to reconsider, but no, he had insisted it was for the best. That it was necessary for Harry's safety, for the greater good. And now, the boy was gone. Minerva inhaled sharply through her nose, willing herself to remain calm. She would not add to the firestorm Albus was already enduring. No doubt the ministry, the Wizengamot, and half the wizarding world were already tearing into him for his failure to safeguard the child. For once, he would have to suffer the consequences of his own arrogance without her interference. But when she next saw him, she would make sure he felt every ounce of her fury. Sirius Black nearly dropped his mug of fire whiskey when his eyes caught the headline in the Daily Prophet. The boy WHO lived missing. His heart pounded in his chest as he skimmed through the article, each word hammering into him like a curse. Harry, his godson, was gone. Vanished without a trace. The ministry was scrambling. Dumbledore was likely in the middle of a political firestorm, and the Aurors were chasing shadows. For the first time in days, his mind cut through the grief, the rage, the guilt that had consumed him since James and Lily's deaths. It was like a bucket of cold water had been thrown over him. He had been about to throw his life away. The moment he had seen Peter alive on that crowded Muggle street, all he had thought about was revenge. He had wanted to tear the rat limb from limb, to make him pay for what he had done. If he had acted on that impulse, he would have ended up in Azkaban before anyone could hear the truth. But Harry was missing, and that meant he could not afford to be reckless. He needed to think. His mind, once sharp enough to earn him a place among the best aurors of his generation, finally began working again. He was still technically an auror, even if he had ignored protocol in his grief. He still had authority, and if he played this right, Peter Pettigrew would be in a ministry holding cell before the day was out. Somewhere in London, Sirius moved like a shadow, his wand tight in his grip as he stalked his prey. Peter was scurrying through the alleyways in his filthy little rat form, slipping through the cracks between buildings, desperately trying to stay hidden. But Sirius knew him too well. He had once called this thing a friend. He caught sight of a tiny movement near a drainpipe. Sneaky little rat bastard. Sirius flicked his wand. Stupefy. A bolt of red light shot forward, striking the rat mid-scurry. In an instant, Peter was flung back, stunned and unmoving. Before the spell could wear off, Sirius flicked his wand again. First the animate's reversal spell, silently cast before growling. Petrificus totalis. Peter's limp rat form began to shift, limbs twisting unnaturally as he transformed back into his human shape. His beady eyes darted in panic, his mouth opening as if to scream, but the full body bind held firm. Sirius exhaled, steadying himself. No time to gloat, no time for anger, time to end this. With a sharp turn, he grabbed the paralyzed traitor and, with a loud crack, apparated directly into the DMLE's holding cells. The moment he landed, alarms flared, aurors burst into the room, wands raised, spells already on their lips. Sirius held up his hands, stepping away from Peter's frozen form. "I'm Sirius Black, auror," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard him. He pointed at Peter's rigid body. "This is Peter Pettigrew. He's a traitor, a Death Eater, and the one who betrayed James and Lily Potter." His voice hardened. "I have proof." The aurors hesitated. Then, Moody himself stormed into the room, his magical eye whirling, locking onto the scene in an instant. His real eye widened slightly. "Bloody hell," Moody muttered. His gaze snapped to Sirius. "You'd better pray you're right, Black." Sirius let out a sharp breath, his pulse finally slowing. He was. And soon, the whole world would know it. The dim glow of a single overhead bulb flickered as David Calloway stepped into the cargo hold, clipboard in hand. The air smelled of salt, damp wood, and machine oil, the ever-present hum of the ship's engine vibrating through the metal floor beneath his boots. It was just another routine inventory check, nothing out of the ordinary except for the noise. A soft, rhythmic hissing echoed through the cavernous space. David frowned, pausing mid-step. Snakes. Here. That was impossible. The cargo checked before departure. There weren't supposed to be any animals on board, let alone something that hissed like. He moved cautiously, weaving through stacked crates and barrels, his pulse picking up slightly as the sound grew clearer. It wasn't just hissing, it was melodic, almost like a lullaby. Then he saw it. Curled in the shadows of the farthest corner was the largest snake he had ever seen. Its scales gleamed in the dim light, patterned in a dark, almost hypnotic pattern. But what stole the breath from his lungs was the sight of the tiny sleeping baby nestled safely within its coils. The child, no older than a year, was completely at ease, his little chest rising and falling steadily. His fingers curled into tiny fists against the serpent's smooth scales. And the snake was singing to him. Not in any way David had ever heard before, but the hissing tones had a strange, eerie cadence to them. Almost as if they carried words. "Sleep, little one, safe in my coils," the serpent whispered in its foreign, sibilant language. "No harm will come, no fear shall wake you. The stars watch above, and I watch below." David's breath caught in his throat. He took an unconscious step backward, the clipboard nearly slipping from his grasp. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. This wasn't normal. This was something out of a fever dream, something that didn't belong in the rational world he knew. The snake's head lifted slightly. Golden eyes met his. David felt something cold crawl up his spine. An ancient, predatory intelligence staring through him, assessing, measuring. Then, before he could react, before his mind could scream at him to run, something shifted. A whisper of magic swept over him like a tide, warm and suffocating. Obliviate. His vision swam, and then he blinked. He stood alone in the cargo hold. The crates were undisturbed. The floor was empty. There was no snake, no baby, just silence. David frowned, glancing at his clipboard. Why had he come back here again? Something had drawn his attention, hadn't it? His head ached faintly, shaking off the strange fog creeping at the edges of his thoughts. He muttered a curse under his breath and turned on his heel, heading back toward the exit. He had an inventory check to finish. Whatever it was that had distracted him, it clearly hadn't been important. Probably drank too much of Duroc's homemade whiskey last night, he muttered to himself. The warm coastal air carried the scent of salt and spice as the ship docked in Mumbai's bustling harbor. Muggle workers moved about the docks with routine efficiency, unloading cargo and shouting instructions over the hum of machinery. To the average observer, it was just another freighter arriving from Europe, another transaction in the endless flow of goods that passed through the city's ports. But to the aurors of the Mumbai Department of Magical Law Enforcement, this ship was a puzzle wrapped in magic. Auror Inspector Rajat Singh adjusted his long, dark coat, his sharp eyes scanning the ship with trained precision. Magic lingered here, faint but undeniable, whispering through the air like an unfinished spell. He didn't like it. Magic left traces, and in India, unexplained magic often meant trouble. Behind him, Agent A. Radhya Patel examined the ship's manifest, flipping through the pages with quick efficiency. Cargo is standard, she murmured. No magical items listed, no records of wizarding passengers. By all accounts, this is an ordinary Muggle ship. Quote, except it isn't, Rajat said dryly, his fingers twitching toward his wand. You feel it too. The third member of their team, Priya Malhotra, frowned as she closed her eyes. Reaching out with her own magic, she shivered. There was a spell here. Strong, but not recent. It's faded, but powerful. Rajat sighed, rubbing his temple. And the source? Priya shook her head. Unclear. Whatever it was done carefully. Whoever cast it knew what they were doing. Aradhya lowered the manifest, glancing up at the ship with a wary expression. The real question is why? Why use magic on a Muggle vessel? What was being hidden? They had only just started their investigation, yet the situation was already raising more questions than answers. A quiet ahem drew their attention to Aditya Banerjee, the ship's assigned Muggle liaison. Unlike the rest of them, he wasn't in auror robes, instead dressed in well-fitted Muggle attire. His job was simple: communicate with the Muggles in a way that didn't immediately terrify them. Well, Rajat asked, crossing his arms. Banerjee adjusted his glasses. I spoke to the crew. Only one reported anything unusual. David Calloway, a cargo inspector. He claims he thought he heard something strange in the hold a few nights ago. Something like hissing, hissing, Priya repeated, brows furrowing. Like a parcel mouth. Unclear, Banerjee admitted. His memory of the event is odd. He doesn't recall seeing anything, but he remembers being startled for some reason. It's like he had a passing moment of fear but can't place why. Rajat and Aradhya exchanged looks. Obliviation? Aradhya asked, her voice tense. Banerjee hesitated. Possibly, but if so, it was subtle. Not the usual Western hack job where they slice a memory clean out. His lips curled slightly in distaste. His recollection feels more like a confused dream. A foggy moment of drunken imagination rather than outright erasure. The three aurors scowled. The Indian magical community did not use obliviation as casually as the rest of the wizarding world. They never had. The spell was known for its dangers. Too many castings, and a person's mind would begin to break, leaving holes where memories should have been. Repeated exposure caused irreversible damage, something that many foreign ministries ignored in favor of secrecy. India's approach had always been different. Their magical society coexisted with Muggles more openly, subtly influencing legends, traditions, and beliefs rather than outright erasing knowledge. If a Muggle ever saw something they shouldn't, it was far safer to adjust the context of a memory rather than rip it out entirely. Whatever had happened to this man, it was done with precision, not the blunt force method typical of European wizards. Someone was hiding something, Priya murmured, her dark eyes thoughtful. And they were very careful about it. Rajat exhaled through his nose, his instincts on high alert. A Parselmouth, a skilled caster, and an unknown magical presence on a Muggle ship. This is bigger than a simple smuggling case. Aradhya nodded. What's our next step? Rajat's gaze flickered over the ship one last time before settling on the vast, sprawling city beyond the docks. Find out who used magic here. And why. Sirius Black stepped out of the interrogation room, rolling his stiff shoulders as if shaking off the weight of the last several hours. His throat was dry from talking, his head ached from the lingering effects of Veritaserum, but he was free. He had proven his innocence. Peter was in chains, his pathetic excuses dismissed under the weight of irrefutable truth. The aurors had confirmed that Peter had been the Potter's secret keeper, and under the serum, he had confessed to everything. The traitor would be sent to Azkaban, where he belonged, and Sirius would not. Yet, despite his victory, he felt no relief. Harry was missing. The thought gnawed at him, an unbearable weight settling in his chest. He had failed his godson once by not being there when he needed him most. He wouldn't fail him again. Sirius Black, he turned sharply, his wand hand twitching out of habit, but it was only a ministry clerk. A young witch holding out a parchment envelope. No ministry seal, Gringotts. A letter came for you, she said, shifting nervously under his gaze. Frowning, he took the envelope, breaking the seal with one quick motion. To Sirius Orion Black, you were summoned to Gringotts at the earliest possible convenience. Head of House Arcturus Black requires your presence. This is not a request. Gringotts stared at the parchment. His grandfather, Arcturus Black, was summoning him. The last time they had spoken was years ago, before Sirius had stormed out of Grimmauld Place for good. Arcturus had never seemed overly interested in his rebellious grandson. He had tolerated Sirius's defiance in the way one might tolerate an amusing inconvenience. Why summon him now? More importantly, did Arcturus know something about Harry? Shoving the letter into his coat, Sirius turned on his heel, marching toward the ministry's flow network. Whatever the old man wanted, he'd find out soon enough. The goblins at the entrance barely spared him a glance as Sirius strode through the marble halls, his boots clicking against the polished floors. He was immediately escorted to a private meeting chamber, a heavy iron door closing behind him with a dull thud. At the far end of the room, seated in a high-backed chair, was Arcturus Black. The old man had aged since Sirius had last seen him. His once dark hair now a silvery white, his sharp aristocratic features lined with age. But his presence was as formidable as ever, his piercing gray eyes held all the weight of a man who had spent a lifetime maneuvering the labyrinthine politics of the Black family. Sirius, Arcturus greeted, his voice crisp, cool, and completely unreadable. Sit. Sirius crossed his arms. I wasn't aware we were still on speaking terms. Grandfather. A flicker of amusement crossed Arcturus's face before it was gone. You assume I summoned you for your benefit, he said dryly. Sit down, boy. Sirius clenched his jaw but sat. The moment he did, Arcturus pushed a document across the table. Sirius glanced at it and froze. His name was there, written in official Black family parchment. Sirius Orion Black, heir to the House of Black. What the hell is this? Sirius snapped, shoving the paper back. I was disowned. Remember, dear old mum blasted me right off the tapestry. Arcturus exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. Your mother, he said, voice edged with condescension, was never the head of the House of Black. She had no legal authority to disown you. He gave Sirius a withering look. Only the head can name an heir. I am the head. And I am naming you. Sirius opened his mouth then closed it. Because as much as he hated to admit it, Arcturus was right. The Black family wasn't just a name, it was an institution. Governed by laws older than the ministry itself. Walburga might have been a raving lunatic, but she had never held the power she thought she did. And now, Arcturus was making his position very clear. Sirius let out a short, humorless laugh. You've got to be joking. Me, heir to the most ancient and noble House of Black. He gestured at himself. Do I look like someone who gives a damn about family? Politics? Arcturus gave him a measured look. No, and that is precisely why I am choosing you. Sirius blinked. I am dying. Sirius, Arcturus said bluntly. It will not be this year. Perhaps not even the next, but I am old, and my time is ending. His fingers tapped against the polished wood of the table. I have no suitable successor. You will take my place. Sirius scowled. Regulus is still alive. Quote, Regulus is dead, Arcturus countered sharply. As good as. He disappeared months ago, and I highly doubt he will return. His eyes gleamed. That leaves you. Sirius's stomach twisted, but he shoved the feeling aside. Regulus had made his choices. If he was truly gone, that was on him. He exhaled through his nose. Why should I care? What's in this for me? Arcturus's lips curled. Harry. Sirius stilled. Arcturus leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. Harry Potter is Doria Potter née Black's grandson. My grandson. His gray eyes were sharp. Hink I would not have a vested interest in his well-being. Sirius clenched his fists. He had forgotten. His grandmother, Doria, had been Arcturus's sister. Harry was black blood. I will not have my great-nephew lost to history. Arcturus continued. Nor will I allow you to fail him. Sirius's jaw tightened. I'm already looking for him. You'll need resources to do that properly. Arcturus gestured to the document between them. Sign, and you'll have them. Sirius hesitated. Everything in him screamed to refuse, to tell his grandfather to go to hell. He had spent years running from the Black family, from the expectations, the traditions, the chains. But this wasn't about him. This was about Harry, and Arcturus Black, for all his cunning, all his ruthlessness, was right. If Sirius wanted to find his godson, to keep him safe, to ensure that no one ever took him away again, he needed power. And the Black name, it had power. He grabbed the quill, and signed. Chapter 4. The dim light of the study flickered as Sirius Black rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. 5 damn years. 5 years of searching, chasing leads, bribing informants, and sifting through every rumor, every whisper, and every ridiculous conspiracy that so much as hinted at the whereabouts of his missing godson. And still nothing. Across from him, Remus Lupin sat hunched over a stack of parchment, his amber eyes scanning the latest reports they had gathered. The werewolf looked as tired as Sirius felt, his worn robes loose on his frame, a testament to years of struggle. This one's from a contact in Cairo, Remus murmured, flipping through a letter. Mentions an Andras, a foreigner seen traveling through the outskirts of the Indian wilderness with what some described as a feral child. But no mention of a scar. Sirius exhaled sharply, slamming his fist onto the desk. It's always the same. A whisper here, a sighting there. A boy seen in a jungle, living like a ghost. But nothing solid. He ran a hand through his now shorter, well-groomed hair, a stark contrast to the wild mess it had been 5 years ago. Remus sighed, setting the parchment down. At least we know he's alive. And more importantly, he's not in Britain. Sirius scowled. I figured that out years ago, Mooney. The moment we realized there was no trace of him anywhere in the Isles, I knew whoever took him had taken him far away. And they've kept him hidden ever since, Remus added, voice thoughtful. No school records, no magical traces strong enough to be tracked, no sightings in wizarding communities. Whoever took him didn't just kidnap him, Sirius. They're raising him. Sirius gritted his teeth. That had been his worst fear. That someone had stolen Harry to mold him into something else. But he rumors, the whispers of a boy surviving in the wild, seen only in glimpses across vast jungles and ancient forests, they painted a different picture. They're keeping him away from wizards, Sirius muttered, his brow furrowing. Hiding him in places most of us would never think to look. Remus leaned back in his chair. The primeval world, not the civilized one. Sirius gave a humorless laugh. Well, that really narrows it down, doesn't it? He gestured to the scattered maps and notes littering the table. Mooney, there are multiple bloody jungles across the world. India, Africa, the Amazon hell, even parts of Southeast Asia. I'm an auror, not some muggle explorer from those adventure books. Remus smirked faintly. You mean like those muggle travelers you keep reading about? Sirius huffed. Shut up. But the reality was, he was stuck. He had leads, but no way to narrow them down. He knew Harry was out there, somewhere in the untamed wilderness, hidden from the eyes of the wizarding world. But without a precise location. It was like searching for a single star in a vast night sky. I need to find him, Sirius murmured, his voice tight with emotion. I promised James and Lily I'd protect him. He clenched his fists. I failed once. I won't fail again. Remus sighed, reaching over to squeeze his shoulder. We'll find him, Sirius. Somehow. We will. Sirius exhaled, steeling himself. He had spent 5 years chasing shadows. He wasn't about to stop now. The thick canopy of the Indian jungle was alive with the sounds of the wild chirping insects, distant calls of monkeys, anding of unseen creatures. But all of that barely registered to Joran Dask, a wizard poacher with years of experience hunting magical creatures for profit. Tonight, he wasn't after the usual fare of Ashwinder eggs or the occasional illegally trapped Thunderbird chick. No, tonight's target was Noctilus gigantus, a species of massive magical bats whose blood could be used in high-end potion crafting. A single vial could fetch a fortune, and he and his crew had been tracking a colony for days now. But then he saw something worth even more. A boy barely 5 or 6 years old moving through the trees like he belonged there. Joran had seen many strange things in his time, but this was something else. The child ran across the branches of the towering trees with unnatural grace, his bare feet barely making a sound. His skin was tanned from the sun, his dark, messy hair whipping in the wind. Even from a distance, Joran saw the boy's eyes. Glowing green. He grinned, turning to the 2 other poachers with him. That, he whispered, will fetch a fortune. Magical children, especially feral ones, were a rare commodity. There were always pureblood families who loved the idea of buying a wild child with strong magic to raise as their own personal pet, trained and conditioned from a young age. Joran gave a silent signal, and the 3 of them moved quickly, weaving through the jungle with expert ease. The boy hadn't seen them. Or so they thought. They pursued him for what felt like minutes, the thick foliage making it difficult to move as swiftly as the child did. But they were gaining on him. He was heading toward a mangrove swamp, the twisted trees growing from black, brackish water. Joran grinned. Nowhere left to run, kid. Then, the jungle went silent. Joran stopped, his breath hitching. No insects, no night birds, no rustling of leaves. The silence was unnatural, the kind that sent a shiver up a man's spine. His 2 companions stiffened beside him, their wands half raised as they scanned the trees. The mangrove ahead loomed like a graveyard, massive roots twisted like gnarled fingers, the dark water motionless, not even a ripple disturbing its surface. Something was wrong. Joran licked his lips. You feel that? He whispered. Before either of his men could answer, the trees above moved. A shadow blurred from the branches, too fast, too big, a massive form dropping from the canopy. Then, pain. Joran gasped as 2 enormous fangs sank into his chest, piercing through muscle, slicing into bone. His vision swam, his veins burned. Poison. No, he realized dimly, venom. His knees buckled as he choked, barely able to register the screams of his men. Something massive coiled around him, scales as dark as the water below, stretching on and on. A snake. No, not a snake, something beyond that. It was nearly 48 feet long, thick as a tree trunk, its coils crushing, twisting. And its head. Golden eyes, staring into his soul. Joran's body convulsed, the venom scorching through his blood, his heart hammering erratically in his chest. His vision blurred, but through the haze of pain, he saw movement. The boy. He crawled down the twisted mangrove trunks, his glowing emerald eyes locking onto Joran's fading ones. His movements were slow, deliberate, inhumanly fluid. Then, the boy hissed. Not a word, not a scream. A hiss low and drawn out, like the whisper of the jungle itself. Joran tried to speak, tried to ask what he was, but the question died on his tongue. Because in the next second, he did too. The jungle night was alive again, the eerie silence from before replaced by the usual chorus of chirping insects, rustling leaves, and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. The wind carried the scent of damp earth, blooming flowers, and the faint metallic ang of spilled blood from the unfortunate poachers who had dared trespass. Nagini, her massive coils draped lazily across a low-hanging branch, let out a long, slow sigh as she stared at the small figure in front of her. Her son. Her impossible, frustrating, utterly incorrigible son. Harry. Her voice carried the weight of tired patience. What have I told you about leading hapless poachers into the jungle? Harry. perched cross-legged atop the thick root of an ancient tree, grinned unabashedly. His wild mess of dark hair was even more unruly than usual, his sun-kissed skin smeared with streaks of dirt and remnants of jungle fruit. His emerald eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight gleamed with mischief. "That it is rude," he offered, feigning innocence. Nagini narrowed her golden eyes. "And yet, you have done it again." Harry stretched, completely unrepentant. "In my defense, they were poachers." Nagini let out a hissing breath, exasperation clear in her tone. "Yes, and we both loathe them. But 5 years of being hunted by fools with wands and crossbows is enough to tire any mother, Harry. Would it kill you to avoid them?" Harry tilted his head, considering. "Maybe, but it is so much more fun this way." Nagini gave him a long, unimpressed stare. Harry's grin widened. "Besides," he continued, "I was going to send them to the DMLE." Nagini flicked her tongue in dry amusement. "Oh, were you planning to just drop their bodies into the nearest ministry office like a gift-wrapped package?" Harry chuckled. "No, that would be rude." He leaned back against the trunk. "The tribal folk wouldn't like that either. Just dumping bodies into their lands would be a rather terrible thing to do." Nagini sighed again. "At least you have some manners." Harry kicked his legs idly. "I spotted them long before they saw me. You know, they were hunting the bats." His expression became more animated. "The big ones with the soft wings. I like snuggling up to them." Nagini shook her head, amused despite herself. Of course he did. Most children clung to stuffed toys at his age. Harry, on the other hand, had decided that giant nocturnal creatures made the best pillows. "One day," she mused, "you will give me a heart attack. My little one." Harry laughed, hopping down from the root and padding over to her. He had long since adapted to moving through the jungle barefoot, his steps noiseless. His movements as fluid as any serpent's. He climbed onto her coils without hesitation, nestling into the warmth of her scales as he had done since infancy. "But you love me anyway," he murmured, pressing a hand against her side. Nagini let out a soft, affectionate hiss, curling her tail protectively around him. Always. Near the jungles of Madhya Pradesh, central India. The air inside the Bhopal DMLE headquarters was thick with the familiar scent of parchment, ink, and the sharp tang of antiseptic potions. Inside one of the morgue chambers, a team of aurors and post-mortem healers stood around 3 lifeless bodies. Each laid out on an examination table under glowing enchanted lights. It was the 4th time this year. And it was becoming an annoying pattern. Auror Dhruv Kashyap Sig, head as he pinched the bridge of his nose, staring down at the latest unfortunate trio of wizarding poachers who had met their untimely end in the depths of the jungle. His patience had already been worn thin the last time this had happened. But now it was just ridiculous. "Let me guess," he muttered, glancing at healer Jahan Mehta, who was conducting the examination. "More poachers who met their match," Jahan hummed, peering at the deep puncture wounds on the first corpse's chest. "Oh, most definitely," he confirmed, tapping his wand over the body's cold skin. "Cause of death: massive envenomation. The venom spread through the bloodstream in seconds, far too fast for any common snake." This was a magical one. Dhruv's partner, Auror Aisha Rao, crossed her arms. "So they wandered into he wrong part of the jungle and got themselves killed." Again, Jahan nodded. "And again, someone decided to portkey their bodies directly into our offices." There was an exasperated silence. Dhruv ran a hand down his face. "I'm sorry, how in the name of the ancestors is this still happening? Portkeys are tracked. Someone should have picked up on the unauthorized usage. Whoever is doing this isn't stupid, Dhruv. They've been at this for nearly a year. The portkeys are subtle, with 0 magical signatures attached to them. Not even our best enchanters have figured out how they're being made." Jahan raised an eyebrow. "So, in short, some unknown person is going around hunting poachers, letting them die to the jungle, and then casually dropping their bodies into the DMLE like it's a parcel delivery service." "That is exactly what is happening." Aisha let out an annoyed sigh. "And frankly, it's getting on my nerves." Dhruv grumbled under his breath. "Let's go over this again. What do we know?" Aisha listed the facts off on her fingers. 1. The poachers all die in the jungle, far from any civilized wizarding areas. 2. Every time, they die under wildlife-related circumstances. Never a killing curse. Never a spell, always nature doing the work. And 3. She gestured at the bodies. They always end up here, neatly dumped into the DMLE with no clues left behind. Jahan tapped the largest corpse. Well, here's something new. This one was bitten by something massive. The venom melted through his insides in seconds. He whistled lowly. A snake that large, magical or not, there aren't many that match the description. Drew's frown deepened. A runospore. Jahan shook his head. Too small. And runospores have 3 sets of puncture wounds. This is 1 bite. That means a single head. A constrictor-sized venomous serpent shouldn't exist, but, he gestured at the corpse. Well, here we are. Aisha let out an exaggerated groan. Brilliant. So now we have an unknown giant venomous snake running around. And a mystery benefactor sending us poacher corpses like festival gifts. Drew exhaled sharply. At this point, I don't know whether we're dealing with a rogue vigilante, a sentient magical beast, or some kind of jungle guardian spirit that really hates poachers. Jahan smirked. Who says it can't be all 3? Aisha rubbed her temples. We need to track the next portkey as soon as it happens. Drew nodded. Agreed. We're not letting whoever is doing this keep making fools of us. I don't care if it's a wizard, a snake, or bloody Shiva himself, we're finding out who is behind this. Silence settled in the room again as they all stared down at the lifeless bodies, their expressions a mixture of irritation, confusion, and begrudging admiration. This wasn't just a case anymore. Now it was personal. Chapter 5. The Bhopal Magical Gazette, May 3, 1987. Mystery in the Mangroves. 18 poachers dead, no suspects found. By Roshni Varma, Senior Correspondent. For over a year, the Bhopal Department of Magical Law Enforcement (DMLE) has been grappling with an unprecedented mystery, one that has left even the most experienced aurors baffled. A staggering 18 known poachers, all illegally hunting magical creatures in the dense jungles of Madhya Pradesh, have been found dead under eerily similar circumstances. Their bodies, riddled with wounds consistent with wildlife attacks, have appeared without warning in the DMLE's secure holding cells delivered by portkeys with no traceable magical signatures. The latest case, recorded just last week, has only deepened the enigma. Healers confirm that the victim died from massive envenomation caused by a venomous serpent of unnatural size. Yet, no known species in India matches the sheer scale of T. He injuries, suggesting either a previously undocumented magical creature or something far stranger. A jungle with no answers. Efforts to investigate the origin of the portkeys have led aurors to a single, recurring location: a vast, magically dense mangrove deep within the jungle, known for its eerie silence and lack of human settlements. Attempts to track magical disturbances within this region have proven futile, as whatever force resides there seems to mask its presence with alarming efficiency. Head auror Dhruv Kashyap, who has been leading the investigation since the first body appeared, voiced his frustration at the lack of progress. We know where the bodies are coming from, but we don't know who or what is behind it. The jungle is vast, and without proper magizoologists to aid us, we're running in circles. All we know is that someone or something is taking justice into their own hands, and we have no idea why. Local legends. A boy among the snakes. Interestingly, some tribal leaders from local indigenous communities have spoken of a boy raised by a massive serpent, a tale dismissed by many as mere folklore. According to these stories, a child, barely older than 6 or 7, has been glimpsed in the jungle, living outside human civilization and moving with unnatural agility through the trees. One elder, when asked about the rumors, simply said, "The jungle protects its own. Those who hunt with greed will never leave." Whether this is a mere myth or something more remains to be seen. For now, the DMLE urges all magical individuals to exercise extreme caution when traveling near the mangrove regions and to report any sightings of unusual wildlife activity. But one thing is certain: something watches over the jungle, and it does not forgive. The room was dimly lit, a few scattered candles casting flickering shadows against the walls. Parchments, maps, and old texts were strewn across Sirius Black's desk, remnants of his 5 nearly 6-year search for Harry Potter. Every lead, every whisper of a boy seen in the wild, had led to dead ends. Until now, Sirius stared at the Bhopal Magical Gazette magically translated into English, his grey eyes scanning the article again and again. His heart hammering in his chest. A boy raised by a massive serpent. A child, barely older than 6 or 7, glimpsed in the jungle, living outside human civilization. Something watches over the jungle. And it does not forgive. Harry, Sirius whispered. It had to be. He looked up at Remus, who sat across from him, his expression cautious but hopeful. This is the best lead we've ever had, Mooney. Remus nodded, leaning forward. It does match what little we know. The sightings, the disappearances, it all points to a child hidden in the jungle. But Sirius, there's more. Sirius frowned. More. Remus exhaled and pulled out a separate scroll, one carrying the seal of Gringotts. Sirius's stomach twisted. What is this? Remus slid it over. I took your advice and add Gringotts, do a deep lineage check on Harry. Not just the Potters, but his maternal line. He hesitated. What they found is unexpected. Sirius broke the seal, his eyes quickly scanning the document. The more he read, the more his heart pounded. Lily Evans' ancestry was not just a random Muggle-born heritage. She was a direct descendant of Salazar Slytherin. Not from the Gaunt line, not from the inbred, magic-degraded remnants that had produced Voldemort, but from the main line. The one that had vanished into obscurity centuries ago. Sirius barely breathed. He's a Parselmouth, he said, his voice hoarse with realization. That's why he's survived. Remus nodded. And that's why the jungle and the snakes have protected him. Sirius stood so fast that his chair nearly toppled over. We need to leave. Now. Remus grabbed his arm before he could storm toward the fireplace. Sirius, wait. We can't just charge into the jungles of India blind. This isn't like tracking a rogue Death Eater. In Nocturne Alley, this is untamed wilderness. We need to prepare. Sirius clenched his jaw. He knew Remus was right, but the sheer need to find his godson made patience unbearable. Still, he forced himself to take a breath. Remus continued, his voice firm. We'll contact the Bhopal DMLE. Find out everything they know about these bodies turning up, about the mangrove where this is happening. If Harry's really there, we need a plan. Sirius exhaled, nodding stiffly. A plan, right, but no matter what, he was going to find Harry. And this time, nothing was going to stop him. Dhruv Kashyap had to, alt with many absurd things in his career, cursed smugglers, incompetent ministry officials, a herd of rampaging mooncalves in the DDING. But this was quickly climbing his list of why did I even come into work today. A fresh message had just arrived at his desk via an official Gringotts courier, one bearing the crest of the House of Black. Britain. Of course it was Britain. With a deep sigh, Dhruv unfolded the parchment, his tired eyes scanning the contents. The message was crisp, polite, and formal, but the request itself made his head throb. To Auror Dhruv Kashyap, I hope this message finds you well. I am Sirius Orion Black, head of the House of Black, and I am writing to request a formal discussion with you regarding the ongoing incidents concerning a rumored, feral boy, seen in the jungles of Madhya Pradesh. My associate, Remus Lupin, and I believe this matter may be of great personal significance to us. If you are available, we request a secure international flow meeting at your earliest convenience. Please inform us of your availability. Sincerely, Sirius O. Black, head of the most ancient and noble House of Black. Dhruv ran a hand down his face. Why is my day getting weirder? Aisha Rao, who had been casually sipping chai at her desk, raised an eyebrow at his suffering. What is it? Dhruv waved the letter at her. British nobility wants to talk to me about the jungle child. Aisha choked on her tea. What? Dhruv leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Apparently, Sirius Black, yes, that Sirius Black, the supposedly insane one who turned out to be N.O.T. insane, wants to have a little chat about our ongoing poacher problem. And the mysterious boy no one has been able to catch. Aisha's lips twitched. Huh, that's all you have to say. Huh, she shrugged. I mean, it makes sense. Someone clearly cares about the kid. We've all been wondering who, and maybe we're finally about to get an answer. She smirked. Besides, Black's a former auror, right? Maybe he'll be useful. Dhruv groaned. I hate that you're making a good point. Aisha grinned, setting her cup down. So, when's the meeting? Dhruv sighed. Let's just say, as soon as I can figure. Out how to deal with a raging British noble with a missing heir complex without getting a migraine. He grabbed his quill and begrudgingly wrote his reply. This was going to be one hell of a conversation. Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The fire crackled softly in the ornate hearth, casting long shadows across the dark paneled walls of Grimmauld Place. The study smelled of aged parchment, fine ink, and lingering scent of old magic woven into the very foundation of the Black ancestral home. Sirius Black sat across from Arcturus Black, his formidable grandfather and the former head of house, who now regarded him with sharp, assessing eyes. Despite his age, Arcturus was still as commanding as ever. His silver-white hair was neatly combed back, his aristocratic features hardened by decades of navigating wizarding politics. Though he had officially passed the title of Lord Black to Sirius, his cunning mind remained as sharp as ever. And right now, that mind was entirely focused on the troubling tale Sirius had just relayed. The mangrove, the creatures, the boy with glowing green eyes, moving like a phantom through the trees. Arcturus sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. So, you found something after all. Quote, Sirius exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. Yeah, but we're not equipped to handle this. His frustration was evident. That place is wrong, Arcturus. I've seen a lot of strange things in my life, but this jungle. It's alive in a way that makes my instincts scream. He clenched his jaw. If Harry is in there, we need to be careful. Rushing in could get us all killed. Arcturus nodded slowly. Then the answer is simple. He leveled Sirius with a pointed look. You need an expert. Sirius frowned. I had magizoologists with me. Not good enough. Arcturus waved a dismissive hand. The two you had may be competent, but they are not who you need. If you want to navigate that mangrove, you need someone who understands magical ecosystems on a fundamental level. Someone who can tell you what is natural and what is not. Sirius's frown deepened. You're suggesting someone specific. Arcturus gave a slow, deliberate nod. Newton's Scamander. Sirius hesitated. Newt Scamander is in America, last I heard. And the British Ministry and Macusa haven't exactly been on friendly terms since 1975. Arcturus scoffed. Yes, because some halfwit from British Ministry decided it would be a good idea to unleash a captive chimera in the middle of an American Muggle zoo in St. Louis. Sirius winced. Yeah, that was a disaster. A diplomatic nightmare, Arcturus corrected sharply. Macusa nearly cut off all international cooperation with our ministry after that idiotic stunt. The only reason they didn't was because our unspeakables managed to smooth things over barely. He shook his head. Regardless, Scamander is not Macusa's man. He answers to no one but himself. Sirius exhaled, leaning forward. You really think he'd help? Arcturus's eyes gleamed. I think if you tell him that there is an undiscovered magical ecosystem hidden within the depths of the Indian jungle, one possibly harboring an unknown guardian beast and a wizard raised child, he'll be on the next international portkey before you can finish the bloody sentence. Sirius considered it. Newt Scamander was legendary in the field of magizoology. If anyone could make sense of the cryptids lurking in that jungle, it was him. And if Harry was in there, hidden among the creatures, then Sirius needed every advantage he could get. He sighed. All right, I'll send the letter. Arcturus gave a satisfied nod. Good. And don't waste time, Sirius. Your godson has survived in that jungle for years, but how much longer can he stay hidden before something else finds him? Sirius swallowed hard. He didn't intend to find out. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Scamander home, casting a golden glow over the breakfast table where Newt Scamander sat, happily absorbed in his morning tea and a plate of toast with marmalade. Across from him, his wife, Porpentina, China Scamander, sipped her coffee, flipping through the latest edition of the American Wizarding Times. It was a rare, quiet morning, the kind of peace that usually didn't last long in the Scamander household. Then a sharp cry echoed outside the window. Both of them looked up just as a large, sleek American messenger hawk swooped in through the open window, landing gracefully on the edge of their dining table. Newt set down his tea immediately. Oh, hello there. The hawk ruffled its feathers, extending its leg, where an official-looking scroll was tied. The seal on it was unmistakable: House Black, Britain. China raised an eyebrow. Sirius Black, Haven't heard that name in a while. Newt untied the letter and unrolled it, his sea-green eyes quickly scanning the contents. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to deep, intense focus. Tina knew that look. That was Newt's adventure sense, tingling. By the time he finished the letter, he was already standing, reaching for his battered leather case. Tina chuckled, setting down her coffee. You haven't even told me what it says, and you're already packing. Newt, distracted as he rifled through his belongings, murmured, fascinating, a hidden magical ecosystem, entirely undocumented cryptids, a lost wizard-raised child, oh. And possibly a guardian beast of unknown origin. Tina sighed fondly. So, we're going to India then? Newt beamed at her. Yes. Would you mind packing essentials while I prepare my travel gear? Tina shook her head, amused but not at all surprised. She picked up the letter, quickly skimming through it herself. She mused aloud. Sounds like I'll need to pick up some India-appropriate outfits while we're there. Newt, already halfway out the door, called back, I'm sure we'll find something at a market. Tina chuckled to herself, shaking her head. Here we go again. And with that, she flicked her wand, sending their belongings into their travel bags. The Scamander adventure. Auror Dhruv Kashyap was so very done. His day had already been bad enough wrangling reports about murdered poachers, cryptid-infested mangroves, and a possibly feral wizard child living among the wildlife. Now he was stuck in a long-winded meeting with the head of the Department of Magical Creatures, Professor Amrit Reddy. A man who had spent the last 45 minutes droning on about the ecological importance of whatever the hell lived in that jungle instead of how to find the missing boy. Of course, Reddy was saying, adjusting his round spectacles, if we were to fully understand the nature of this ecosystem, we would need proper field research teams, careful magical tracking, and... The door slammed open. Auror Aisha Rao stepped in, grinning like she had just set up the best prank of the century. Heads up, Dhruv, she said, far too cheerfully. Your headache's about to get worse. And then she led in Newt Scamander and Porpentina Scamander. Newt was practically vibrating with excitement, his sea-green eyes alight as he scanned the room before immediately zeroing in on the two magizoologists who had accompanied Dhruv into the mangrove. Oh, you must be Arvind Iyer and Reena Deshmukh. Newt beamed, stepping forward far too quickly for a man his age. I read your repo. RTS about the Noctilus gigantus colony and the Nagaraja crocodilians absolutely fascinating. Tell me, have you conducted a full magical analysis on their behavioral patterns, or is this mostly based on field observation? Arvind, caught between stunned admiration and awkward bafflement, stammered, mostly field observation, but we... Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Newt clapped his hands together, already pulling a worn leather notebook from his coat. Then we'll have so much to discuss. I was just thinking about the adaptive qualities of semi-aquatic magical reptiles, and your findings could be groundbreaking. Reena blinked, looking at Arvind. Is this really happening? Meanwhile, standing off to the side, Dhruv slowly turned to glare at Sirius Black. Sirius, to his eternal irritation, looked completely unrepentant. Remus Lupin, standing beside him, was sniggering into his hand, clearly enjoying the chaos. Dhruv rubbed his temples, already feeling the migraine forming. This was his life now. He couldn't get a break even if he begged the gods for one. The warm air was thick with salt and humidity as the team landed on the sandy beach that led into the vast, eerie mangrove jungle. The Portkeys' energy faded, leaving behind Newt Scamander, his wife Porpentina Scamander, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and the two magizoologists, Arvind Iyer and Reena Deshmukh. Thankfully, Dhruv Kashi, AP had wisely decided to sit this one out. The moment Newt's boots touched the ground, the excited sparkle in his eyes intensified. Oh, this is spectacular. He breathed, immediately crouching down to examine the sand beneath him. With a quick flick of his wand, he muttered an analysis charm, his notebook floating beside him, scribbling notes on its own. Sirius and Remus exchanged a bemused glance. Tina Scamander, having far too much experience with her husband's hyperfocus, ignored him entirely and began setting up the camp, conjuring tents, securing their perimeter, and ensuring that their supplies were properly stored. Meanwhile, Newt was completely lost in his own world. Iyer, Deshmukh, Newt called out, gesturing wildly at the Mangroves roots. The magical saturation here is unlike anything I've seen outside of deep restricted ecosystems. This kind of ambient magic usually suggests generational accumulation, possibly even a self-sustaining leyline cycle. Have either of you taken magical density readings? Arvind, thrilled beyond belief, immediately fell into step beside Newt. We've recorded fluctuations, but we weren't sure if it was a leyline anomaly or something more creature-driven. Rena nodded excitedly. Some of the plants here should not be growing this large without direct magical interference. We think the ecosystem is self-reinforcing, possibly due to magical apex species acting as stabilizers. Newt's eyes lit up even more. Oh, now that is fascinating. Have you noticed any symbiotic interactions between fauna and the surrounding flora? Sirius, standing off to the side, blinked. Remus looked equally lost. Are they speaking a different language? Sirius muttered. Remus pinched the bridge of his nose. I think they are. Tina, setting up the last of the camp's wards, smirked as she walked past them. You'll get used to it. Sirius shook his head. Doubt it. Meanwhile, Newt had already moved on, pulling out a set of enchanted vials to collect samples from the soil, the plant life, and even the air itself. And the expedition had only just begun. The first thing Newt's commander did, after making sure his enchanted notebook was recording everything, was march straight toward the mangrove's edge with Arvind and Rena scrambling to keep up. Sirius and Remus, now fully aware that they were surrounded by magizoologists speaking an entirely different language, had resigned themselves to just watching the chaos unfold. Tina, having long since mastered the art of balancing Newt's enthusiasm with actual survival instincts, finished reinforcing the camp's protective wards, ensuring nothing would sneak up on them in the night. And then Newt looked up. His entire body froze as he caught sight of them. High above, hanging like massive, living shadows from the twisted branches of the mangrove trees, were the Noctilus gigantus. The massive, magical bats, their leathery wings folded around them like thick cloaks, their fur sleek and dark, looked down at the wizards with eerie intelligence. Some twitched their ears, others clicked their teeth softly, as if curious about these new intruders. One of them, a particularly large specimen, unfolded its wings slightly, stretching out to a wingspan that easily rivaled a hippogriff's. Newt visibly vibrated with excitement. Oh, he whispered, eyes wide as saucers, they're magnificent. Sirius and Remus looked up at the creatures, who were at least the size of fully grown wolves, and immediately came to the same conclusion. Those things could absolutely kill us. Newt, oblivious to their concerns, was already pulling out a specialized observation monocle, adjusting it rapidly. Have you noticed their bone structure? He asked, glancing at Arvind and Rena. They're thicker than normal bat physiology, which suggests denser muscle mass. That means their flight mechanics must be more. A sudden splash interrupted him. Newt immediately spun, eyes darting toward the too calm water, his excitement somehow increasing. Because slithering just beneath the surface, moving without creating a single ripple, were the Nagaraja crocodilians. Sleek, serpentine bodies, glossy obsidian scales, and long, needle-like snouts gliding effortlessly through the black water. One of them surfaced just slightly, its glowing yellow eyes locking onto Newt with an eerie, steady gaze. Newt let out an absolutely delighted sound, somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. Oh, this is marvelous. Sirius leaned over to Remus, whispering, I am 90% sure those things eat people. Remus, deadpan, muttered, Newt's going to try to pet one. Isn't he? Tina, from behind them, without looking up from setting camp, yes. Newt, already stepping toward the water with uncontained joy, was muttering, oh, look at the way their scales shift. They're so smooth, you don't usually see that outside of. Sirius grabbed the back of Newt's coat before he could step into the water. Right, that's enough for now, Sirius muttered, dragging Newt backward. Tina sighed but didn't intervene. She had already prepared containment spells for when her husband inevitably ignored all common sense. Newt, however, wasn't deterred at all. Because now he knew for sure. This was an ecosystem unlike any other. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the mangrove changed. The dense jungle, already eerie during the day, became something else entirely, and the Mo-Online scent fungi along the trees cast an ethereal blue glow, illuminating the tangled roots and dark, glass-like water in an unnatural shimmer. The massive bats, once sleeping, began to stir, their massive wings unfolding, revealing red-gold eyes that gleamed in the darkness. But it was what Newt's commander found just as dusk settled that had him positively glowing with excitement. Standing atop a gnarled root, half-shadowed by the thick foliage, was a creature unlike anything recorded in modern magizoology. It had the predatory grace of a hawk, but its scaled, muscular body was unmistakably reptilian, a cross between a Komodo dragon and a raptor, its sleek feathers blending seamlessly into its thick, plated hide. Its taloned feet gripped the branch with deadly ease, while its powerful tail flicked behind it, keeping its balance as it observed the wizards with unsettling intelligence. Newt, practically vibrating, whispered to Arvind and Rena, "Do you see this? Do you see this?" Rena's jaw had dropped. That's a Ravana drake. But that species was only theoretical. Well, Newt grinned, not anymore. Before he could even consider approaching, the creature let out a sharp, piercing cry, unfurled its half-feathered, half-scaled wings, and vanished into the canopy in a blur of motion. Newt, despite missing the chance to observe it longer, looked thrilled beyond words. Sirius, watching from the side, muttered to Remus, "He's going to die out here, isn't he?" Remus sighed. "Tina won't let that happen." Speaking of Tina's commander, she was currently directing the newly arrived auror reinforcements that had just port-keyed in. The Bhopal DMLE, realizing the magnitude of what they were dealing with, had sent multiple teams of highly trained aurors not just to support the expedition, but to protect the magizoologists from whatever the hell was lurking in this jungle. Even if Newt's commander seemed blissfully unaware of his own mortality. As the aurors finished securing the perimeter, Aisha Rao, one of the senior operatives, walked up to Sirius with a dry smirk. "I hear you brought us a madman, Black." Sirius sighed. "Watch." As Newt practically skipped back to camp, already scribbling notes in his enchanted journal. "You have no idea." The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth, ancient wood, and the ever-present hum of magic that pulsed through the mangrove like a living heartbeat. Golden eyes gleamed in the darkness, unblinking, sharp, watching. Nagini lay coiled atop a high, twisted branch, her mass 55-foot body draped like a silent specter through the gnarled trees. Her dark scales blended perfectly into the surroundings, making her invisible to those who did not know where to look. And below her, Newt's commander nearly died, again. She had been watching him for a grand total of 30 minutes, and in that time, the man had almost walked directly into the path of a hunting Nagaraja crocodilian, seemingly forgetting that just because something looked calm didn't mean it was. Almost tripped over a venomous vine snake, which had been too baffled to even strike. Climbed onto a massive root, only to realize midway up that it was actually the tail of a slumbering Maha Jaruka sloth. Stepped too close to a cluster of mangrove bioluminescent fungi, which while beautiful released hallucinogenic spores when disturbed. Attempted to communicate with a merfolk tribal scout, only to learn that their dialect was entirely different from the ocean-dwelling merfolk he was familiar with. He had nearly been speared for the attempt. Nagini flicked her tongue out in silent amusement as she watched him from the shadows. "This is the man who helped bring down Gellert Grindelwald," she thought, her golden eyes narrowing in wry disbelief. And yet, despite his clear lack of self-preservation, Newt's commander had an undeniable aura of trust about him. The jungle itself, while certainly trying to kill him, had not yet succeeded. Animals that would have attacked hesitated, creatures that normally fled lingered just a second too long, as if trying to understand him. He was not an invader. He was an observer, a seeker of knowledge, and Ire knew that amused her greatly. She had, thankfully, already put Harry to bed nestled deep within the safety of a hollowed-out tree, cushioned in the warm, feathery embrace of a female Mothman owl, her large wings folded protectively around him. Thank Ire that both she and Harry had gained the ability to communicate with the jungle's creatures. A talent that had developed after years of living in the wilds. Harry was as much a part of this jungle as the beasts that roamed it. And soon, he would wake. Nagini's tongue flicked again, her unblinking gaze fixed on the team of wizards setting up camp beneath her. She would watch, and wait, because they had finally come for her son. The real question was, would they be worthy of finding him? The night was alive with the sounds of the jungle, distant calls of creatures unknown, the rustling of leaves disturbed by unseen things, and the occasional splash of something far too large moving through the water. The air was thick with humidity, the scent of damp earth and magic hanging in the air like a living thing. And at the center of the expedition camp, Sirius Black and Remus Lupin sat in stunned, wide-eyed horror. Across from them, Newt's commander casually sipped tea, seemingly completely unbothered by the fact that he had almost been impaled, poisoned, and eaten in the last 45 minutes. China's commander, long-suffering but unfazed, sat beside him, calmly drinking her coffee as if nothing unusual had happened. Newt, blissfully unaware of his companion's mental breakdowns, was speaking enthusiastically to Arvind and Rena about his failed attempt at communicating with the native merfolk of the mangrove. "I must say," Newt began, completely ignoring the fact that he had almost been harpooned. "Their dialect is fascinating. It's far more guttural than the oceanic merfolk I've encountered. And their body language is completely different, possibly due to their more arboreal environment." Sirius slammed his hands on the table, his voice a mix of disbelief and exasperation. "You were nearly speared through the chest, Newt." Newt blinked at him, tilting his head. "Well, yes, but that was due to a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Remus finally found his voice, his face somewhere between horrified and exhausted. "Newt, they tried to kill you." "Well, yes, but that was my fault," Newt admitted. Frowning slightly, "I attempted to use standard Marrow greetings, but their dialect appears to be entirely separate from the usual oceanic linguistic structures. Seems I accidentally told them that I intended to claim their nesting grounds, which," he waved a hand vaguely, "you can understand why that would be met with hostility." Sirius dragged a hand down his face, looking like he was considering throwing himself into the jungle to escape this madness. "They had weapons, Newt. They were going to skewer you like a bloody kebab." China, sipping her coffee, sighed. "This happens more often than you'd think." Sirius gaped at her. "How are you so calm about this?" China raised an eyebrow, setting her cup down. "Sirius, dear, I've been married to him for decades." Remus, still looking mildly horrified, turned to Arvind and Rena for some sense of normalcy. Surely, the professional Indian magizoologists would be just as shocked as he was. Except, eggs. P.T. Arvind and Rena were nodding along enthusiastically, completely absorbed in Newt's discussion as if he had just given a lecture at an academic conference. "Oh, that makes sense," Rena was saying, scribbling notes. "If their language has diverged so much, it's likely they don't have any reference for oceanic kinship terms." "Exactly," Newt beamed, "and I think they may use infrasound vibrations to communicate over long distances." "Which means," Sirius let out a long, suffering groan and slumped forward, banging his forehead against the table. Meanwhile, Aisha Rao, standing in the corner, was absolutely was in stitches. Clutching her sides as she furiously scribbled notes for Dhruv back at the Bhopal DMLE. Entry number 1. Newt's commander, world's most famous magizoologist, apparently does not fear death. Entry number 2. Sirius Black currently questioning all of his life choices. Entry number 3. Remus Lupin is one minor catastrophe away from an existential crisis. Entry number 4. China's commander is probably the only reason Newt is still alive. Entry number 5. Magizoologists are a different breed of wizard, and I'm both impressed and deeply terrified. Sirius lifted his head, looked at Aisha's shaking form, and groaned. "I hate all of you." Aisha just cackled harder. Chapter 8. The early morning mist clung to the jungle like a second skin, wrapping around the ancient, gnarled trees and turning the black waters of the mangrove into something otherworldly. The air was thick with humidity, heavy with the scent of damp earth, blooming flowers, and the ever-present hum of magic. Newt's commander was positively buzzing with excitement. He, China, Arvind, Rena, and a team of seasoned aurors were making their first official expedition deeper into the jungle, armed with observation tools, defensive spells, and a very firm promise from Tina that she would personally hex Newt unconscious if he tried to befriend something venomous without backup. The wildlife was astonishing bioluminescent beetles the size of a child's fist scuttled along the bark, their shells glowing like tiny lanterns. The Noctilus gigantus bats stretched their massive wings in the morning light, preparing to roost after a long night of flight. Newt was midway through discussing the migratory patterns of Nagaraja crocodilians when something shifted. The jungle, so alive with sound only moments ago, fell into a tense, unnatural silence. The aurors, instantly on edge, raised their wands, scanning the shadows between the trees. Then Newt saw her, coiled gracefully around the twisted roots of an ancient tree. Her dark scales blending seamlessly with the shadows, was the largest snake he had ever seen. Nagini. Newt's breath caught. He remembered her, but back then she had been smaller. The Nagini he had once met. The maledictus he had tried to help had been long, certainly, but not this. Not 55 feet of pure, predatory muscle wrapped effortlessly around a tree as if she were its living guardian. Her golden eyes, still sharp and knowing, fixed directly on him. Tina, standing beside him, tensed slightly, one hand hovering near her wand. Newt, however, took a slow breath and lowered his hands. Nagini, he said carefully, voice calm. The massive serpent tilted her head, the motion eerily human. Then, in a voice heavy with hissing syllables, she spoke. "S's commander." Tina inhaled sharply, not because Nagini had spoken, but because her accent had changed. The once soft-spoken woman now had a voice that dragged like silk over stone, her words stretched by the natural shape of her serpent form. Newt, ever the naturalist, noted this immediately. "Your speech patterns have changed," he murmured, fascinated. "The longer you've remained transformed, the more your vocal structure has adapted to a serpent's natural physiology." Nagini's golden eyes gleamed. "USS still talk too much." Tina, blinking in mild disbelief, muttered, "Well, that confirms it's actually her." Nagini let out a low, hissing chuckle. The aurors, still deeply unsettled, kept their wands lowered but ready. Newt, however, took a small step forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Nagini," he said carefully, "we're looking for a child." Nagini's coils shifted, her massive body barely making a sound. "A child," she repeated, tone almost amused. Newt nodded. "Yes, a boy, 7 years old. He was seen in this jungle." Nagini was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly purposefully she smiled. "And why?" she asked, her voice almost playful. "Would I help you find him?" Nagini moved without sound, her massive coils sliding effortlessly through the tangled roots and darkened foliage of the mangrove. The jungle seemed to part for her, the twisted branches and thick undergrowth shifting subtly as she led the expedition deeper into the unknown. Newt's commander followed, his keen eyes absorbing every detail of their surroundings, his notebook floating beside him, furiously scribbling notes on its own. But his mind was not on the strange flora or the creatures that watched from the shadows. It was on Nagini herself. Because something was off. Newt had spent a lifetime observing magical creatures, studying their habits, their patterns, their unspoken intentions. And right now Nagini was stalling. She was deliberate in her movements, taking paths that wound in slow, spiraling detours, pausing just a second too long to comment on a rare plant or a hidden nesting ground. To anyone else, it might have seemed natural. But to Newt, it was the same technique a mother thunderbird used when leading predators away from her nest. She was giving someone time to move. And then he saw it. A flicker of motion high above in the dense, dark canopy. A small shape, barely visible in the shifting shadows. 2 glowing emerald eyes, watching. Newt did not react. He did not call out. He did not alert Tina or the aurors or the eager magizoologists beside him. Instead, he let Nagini continue. Let her believe that he hadn't noticed. Because whatever game she was playing he would play it too. Newt studied Nagini carefully as they walked, noting the way her massive form slithered through the tangled roots, always a step ahead, always guiding. His instinct screamed at him she was hiding something. "So tell me, Nagini," he said conversationally, keeping his voice light, "how long have you lived in this part of the jungle?" Nagini tilted her head slightly, the faintest smirk tugging at the corners of her scaled lips. "A long time, magizoologist," she hissed in response, her voice carrying that odd, almost musical accent of the serpent tongue. "Long enough to know when prey walks into a hunter's den." Newt hummed thoughtfully, glancing around at the twisted mangrove branches. "And yet," he mused, "it seems more like a sanctuary than a hunting ground." Nagini let out a soft, knowing chuckle. "Perhaps." Or perhaps it depends on who is prey, and who is predator. The conversation ended abruptly. The jungle shifted. A deep, bone-rattling growl echoed through the tangled branches, sending flocks of small, chittering creatures scattering into the air. The aurors tensed, wands raised, and the magizoologists froze mid-step. Then it struck. A hulking form launched itself from the shadows, a monstrous hybrid of reptile and ape, covered in thick, scarred scales with wild tufts of coarse, dark fur. It landed with an earth-shaking thud. Its muscular arms tensed, claws gleaming like obsidian. Jagged, protruding fangs gleamed in the dim light as it let out a thunderous roar, its powerful tail lashing behind it. It moved with terrifying speed. One moment, it was crouched among the roots, the next, it was lunging, claws outstretched, aiming straight for Nagini. She barely twisted away in time. The beast's razor-sharp talons raked through the air, slicing deep gouges into the bark of the ancient mangrove behind her. Nagini struck back. Her massive coils lashed out, attempting to wrap around its limbs. The reptilian ape was too strong. It twisted, grabbing her thick, muscled body, and slammed her against the roots with a ground-shaking impact. The aurors reacted instantly, stupefied. A barrage of stunning spells slammed into the creature's hide, but it barely flinched. Its thick, armored scales absorbed the magic, the impacts leaving only faint scorch marks. One of the magizoologists swore. It's resistant. Newt didn't hesitate. Protega Maxima, a shimmering barrier flared to life, barely in time to deflect a sweeping claw strike that would have torn through an auror's chest. Nagini, now fully enraged, struck with the force of a primal titan. Her enormous body coiled around the beast's limbs, constricting with crushing power, her fangs sinking into its shoulder of a bite, delivering enough venom to kill a dragon. The beast shrieked in agony, clawing wildly at her, but her unyielding coils tightened further. Its struggles became weaker. Then with a final, shuddering gasp it went still. Nagini released her hold, allowing the lifeless husk to slump into the thick roots of the mangrove. Silence fell over the jungle once more. Newt slowly lowered his wand, his heart hammering. Nagini turned her head slightly, eyes gleaming in the darkness, and with a knowing smirk, she simply hissed. "You were SSSS saying, magizoologist." Dhruv massaged his temples, staring at Aisha Rao's last report as though it personally offended him. His headache, already at a dangerous level, throbbed like a curse wound. A magically infused maledictus. A maledictus who had stolen Harry James Potter from British soil over 6 years ago. A maledictus who had raised him in the mangrove. A maledictus who had been actively killing poachers with or without the boy's help and could still use magic. He took a deep breath, counted to 5, then slammed his forehead into his desk. Aisha, sitting across from him, snorted into her tea. "You all right there, boss?" "No," Dhruv muttered into the wood grain. "I am not." Aisha, the absolute menace that she was, chuckled as she flipped through her own notes. "This is the most interesting thing to happen in the Bhopal DMLE in years, Dhruv. Maybe decades." Dhruv lifted his head just enough to glare at her. "Aisha," he said, voice dangerously calm. "I handle small-time crime. I catch illegal poachers. I do not deal with magically infused maledictuses, kid. Napping the chosen one and raising him in a magic-drenched mangrove hellscape filled with cryptids." Aisha grinned. "Well, you do now." Dhruv groaned. He was so tempted to drink himself into oblivion. But he couldn't not when there was one more problem. Of course, there was one more problem currently sitting in his office, waiting for him. A representative from the International Confederation of Wizards. And, because life hated him, Albus Too Many Bloody Names Dumbledore was here too. Why couldn't his days go back to catching small-time criminals and illegal poachers? Dhruv took a deep breath before stepping into his office, schooling his face into something resembling professionalism. Seated inside was a severe-looking woman in deep green robes, the ICW representative. She had an air of pragmatic efficiency that Dhruv could respect, unlike the other guest in the room. "Albus Too Many Bloody Names Dumbledore." The old man twinkled at him. Dhruv fought the urge to hex his spectacles off. "Ah, Chief Investigator Kashyap," Dumbledore said with that infuriating grandfatherly tone. "A pleasure." "No, it's not," Dhruv muttered under his breath before turning to the ICW rep. "Dhruv Kashyap," he introduced himself properly, extending a hand. "Chief Investigator, Bhopal DMLE. The woman shook it, her grip firm. Luisa Duarte, she said. ICW Department of Magical Creatures. Ah, so that's why she was here. Dhruv barely held back a sigh of relief. At least she wasn't an ICW political officer. Let's get to the point, shall we? Luisa said briskly, not wasting time. We have a situatio in your jurisdiction regarding a magically altered maledictus. She is also allegedly raising a magically gifted minor. Her sharp brown eyes flicked to Dumbledore, unimpressed. And Britain is demanding the minor's return. Dhruv leaned back, crossing his arms. Let me clarify something, he said, voice dry. Britain is demanding we retrieve a child who has lived in the jungle for over 6 years. Raised by an extremely dangerous magical guardian, who has also spent that time actively killing poachers in one of the most magically dense mangroves on the continent. Dumbledore twinkled harder. Luisa just nodded. Yes. Dhruv pinched the bridge of his nose. Wonderful. And because his life wasn't already miserable enough, Dumbledore decided to speak again. Mr. Potter is the last of the House of Potter. A noble and ancient British family. As his magical guardian. You're not his guardian, Dhruv interrupted flatly. Dumbledore blinked. Pardon. His magical guardian would be Nagini. The temperature in the room dropped. Dumbledore's pleasant expression faltered. Luisa, meanwhile, sat back with a thoughtful hum. That is an interesting perspective, Investigator Kashyap. She steepled her fingers. You're saying that, from a magical standpoint, the maledictus has effectively claimed guardianship over the child. Yes, Dhruv said bluntly. And considering she has actively killed to protect him, I highly doubt she will be willing to hand him over. Dumbledore's expression tightened. Mr. Potter belongs in Britain, he said, the pleasant grandfather act slipping. Luisa turned to him with an arched brow. And yet, he is not in Britain, is he? Dhruv wanted to applaud the ICW rep. Finally, someone who wasn't kissing Dumbledore's ass. Investigator Kashyap, Luisa continued, tapping a finger against her armrest. I will be staying in Bhopal for the foreseeable future. I would like access to all reports regarding this maledictus in her territory. Done. Dhruv agreed immediately. Dumbledore frowned. I was under the impression that. This is not a British case, Luisa interrupted smoothly. This is an ICW Magical Creature Department case. Your presence here is a courtesy, nothing more. Dhruv had never liked Dumbledore. But now, he actively enjoyed watching the old man get put in his place. Dumbledore adjusted his robes, clearly displeased, but said nothing. Luisa stood, extending a hand again. I look forward to working with you, Chief Investigator. Dhruv shook it, feeling, for the first time in days, a sliver of hope. Likewise, as the ICW representative left, Dumbledore lingered for a moment. His blue eyes met Dhruv's, sharp and calculating. You do not know what you are dealing with, the old man said quietly. Dhruv tilted his head. Neither do you. With that, he walked out. Dhruv exhaled. He had a feeling things were about to get a lot more complicated. Dhruv hated his life. Why was he back here? Oh, right, because the ICW representative, Luisa Duarte, wanted to see the situation firsthand. And of course, that meant dragging him along. At least he had Aisha for backup. As they portkeyed into the camp, Dhruv took in the sight of utter chaos. Magizoologists buzzed around like bees, excitedly discussing their findings, scribbling down notes, and handling various magical instruments. Dhruv swore he saw one of them collecting bad guano like it was the rarest thing in the world. And then there was Sirius and Remus. Both men stood off to the side, hollow-eyed and twitchy, looking like they had stared into the abyss for too long. Dhruv sighed. He wasn't paid enough for this. You two look like you've been through hell, Aisha remarked, highly amused. Sirius twitched. They won't shut up. Newt's commander, Remus muttered, rubbing his temples. He's worse than James. Luisa, unimpressed, simply strode past them toward the center of the encampment, where the main event lay. And there she was, Nagini, draped across the thick, gnarled tree branches. Her massive coils looped lazily around the trunk. She looked even larger in the daylight, her dark scales gleaming like polished obsidian, the faint magical shimmer along her form betraying just how dangerous she truly was. But Dhruv's eyes were drawn to what lay within those massive coils. A child, a small, black-haired, 7-year-old boy, curled up on one of the loops, sleeping peacefully. Harry James Potter. Dhruv had dealt with criminals, smugglers, poachers, and dark creatures. But this was something entirely different. And if the way Nagini's slit-pupilled gaze flicked down to them was any indication, she was very much aware of the power she held in this moment. Louisa, to her credit, didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head slightly. "You are Nagini?" she asked in a level tone. The Maledictus's massive head lowered slightly, tongue flicking out before she spoke in a heavily accented, hissing English. "Yes, Duarte, International Confederation of Wizards," Louisa introduced herself. Her tone professional. "I oversee the Department of Magical Creatures." Nagini's tongue flicked again, as if tasting the air. "A handler of BSSTSSS, she murmured, amusement curling in her voice. "Not a politician." Louisa smirked. "No, I don't deal with politics. I deal with facts." That seemed to intrigue the Maledictus. She uncoiled slightly, but not enough to move the sleeping child from her embrace. "And what do you wish to know, handler of BSSTSSS?" Dhruv tried not to groan. This was going to be a long day. Louisa Duarte was not a woman easily swayed. Born in Recife, Brazil, she had spent her youth navigating the treacherous waters of magical conservation, cursed bloodlines, and hybrid species disputes. A descendant of Portuguese settlers and indigenous Brazilian shamans, she had an innate talent for understanding magical creatures and a reputation for being one of the few individuals who could stare down a raging chimera without blinking. By the time she was 35, she had already revolutionized ICW policies on magical sentient beings, championing fair rights for beings like merfolk, centaurs, and even werewolves. Now, as the heir of the Department of Magical Creatures, Cursed Individuals, and Crossbreeding Offices DMCCICO, she wielded authority that extended across multiple nations, ensuring that laws and treaties protect both magical creatures and their human counterparts. And she did not take kindly to unnecessary political interference. Which is exactly why she ignored the British ministry's outrage over the heir Potter situation, and personally came to India. Which was also why she got shafted with Dumbledore, whom she despised heavily before the old man was told off and sent back to Britain. Then she wed up with a quick portkey to his mangrove in this jungle before laying eyes upon the massive snake that was the source of nearly 6 long years of bureaucracy-related issues. Nagini's slitted gold eyes observed Louisa with sharp intelligence. Louisa, in turn, took in the serpentine form before her not just as a Maledictus but as a being that had adapted entirely to its environment. "A true guardian. You have raised the child?" Louisa asked plainly. Nagini's coils shifted slightly, though she remained relaxed. "I have protected him," she corrected, her accent thick but words deliberate. "Taught him. Guided him. He is mine as much as I am his." Louisa's expression remained neutral. By ICW law, any magical sentient being who assumes guardianship of a child must adhere to international regulations, she stated firmly. The law extends to beings such as Vila, vampires, certain categories of werewolves, and as of 20 years ago cursed individuals. Nagini's eyes narrowed slightly, her tongue flicking out. "And if I refuse?" Louisa smiled, not out of amusement, but with the confidence of someone who had prepared for this exact conversation. "Then you become a criminal in the eyes of the ICW. And I'm sure you don't want that." She took a step closer, eyes unwavering. "But let's be honest, Nagini, you've kept him safe. You've provided for him. You are not his captor. You are his protector." Nagini didn't respond immediately, but she also didn't deny it. Finally, after a long silence, she gave the smallest nod. Louisa exhaled and turned to face the group of exhausted and emotionally frazzled wizards behind her. Sirius, Remus, Dhruv, Aisha, Newt, and Tina all looked at her expectantly, waiting for her decision. "As per the ICW's guidelines," Louisa announced, authority ringing in her voice, "Nagini, as the current undisputed guardian of Harry James Potter, is legally allowed to keep him under her care within the boundaries of this jungle, provided she follows the regulati set in place for magical natives of India and allows for periodic check-ins by ICW representatives." A heavy silence followed. Then, "Are you joking?" All heads snapped to Dhruv, whose eye twitched violently. You're telling me, he began, his voice filled with the despair of a man who just realized he will never know peace, that the ICW, the International Confederation of Wizards, is allowing a maledictus to raise the boy who lived in a mangrove jungle full of cryptids and apex predators. Louisa simply shrugged. Yes. Drew groaned so hard it was almost a scream. He needed alcohol. Immediately. Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Chapter 11. Auror Inspector Drew Kashyap was having an absolutely horrendous day. Not just a bad day, oh no, that would imply some level of normalcy. This was the kind of day that made a man question his life choices, particularly his decision to join law enforcement in magical India. He had faced dark wizards, rogue beasts, and bureaucratic nightmares, but nothing had prepared him for the relentless headache that was being the middleman for Harry Potter and his absurdly large mother. Drew sat at his desk in the Bhopal Department of Magical Law Enforcement (DMLE), rubbing his temples while a stack of paperwork threatened to collapse beside him. The usual culprits: inter-ministry squabbles, jurisdictional disputes, and of course, the latest round of diplomatic side-eyeing from the British Ministry of Magic. Inspector Kashyap called out Sergeant Kumar, poking his head into the office. Your 3 o'clock has arrived. The Patil family. Drew groaned, downed the last of his coffee, which had long gone cold, and forced himself to his feet. Let's get this over with. The Patil family had the kind of elegance that made Drew feel underdressed in his uniform robes. Arvind Patil, the respected representative of India's magical parliament, was ever the picture of composure, his sharp eyes taking in the office with practiced neutrality. His wife, Meera Patil, a renowned potions and healing professor, was more interested in scanning Drew himself, likely assessing just how close he was to a full mental breakdown. The real trouble, however, came in twin form. Padma and Parvati Patil, 7-year-old whirlwinds of curiosity, energy, and mischief, were already fidgeting, eyes sparkling with excitement. Auror Inspector, Padma said brightly. You look tired. Very tired. Parvati added with a solemn nod. Are you okay? Drew stared at them for a long moment before sighing. No, I am not. But I appreciate your concern. Arvind coughed lightly to suppress a chuckle, while Meera gave her daughters a look that promised later discussions on tact. You're here to see Mr. Potter, aren't you? Drew said, already dreading what was to come. Yes, Parvati beamed. We want to see his home. And the animals. And the magic. Padma clapped her hands. And Mr. Potter himself. Drew gave Arvind a look. Are you sure about this? The boy's unique. Arvind merely smiled. We believe it will be good for everyone involved. Drew exhaled, then pulled a portkey from his pocket. All right, hold on tight. One dizzying moment later, they landed in the heart of the mangrove. Ancient, gnarled roots twisted through the landscape, forming natural pathways above the brackish water. The dense canopy allowed only streaks of golden sunlight through, illuminating the thriving, otherworldly ecosystem. The air was thick with the sounds of exotic birds and unseen creatures. Whoa, the twins whispered in unison, eyes wide. Then they saw him. Harry Potter stood barefoot atop one of the thick roots, speaking in Parseltongue to a serpent the size of a small temple. You exaggerate, Mom, the boy said, hands on his hips. I did not fall. I was experimenting with balance. The largest snake any of them had ever seen let out what could only be described as a chuckle. Of course, little one. And when you experimented into the mud, what was the lesson learned? That mud is slippery, Harry muttered. Padma and Parvati did not register the mildly terrifying exchange. They saw Harry Potter standing on a tree root, talking to a giant snake, and immediately launched into action. Harry Potter, Padma shrieked. We found you. Parvati cheered. Before anyone coins sprinted toward Harry. Wait, hold on. Harry barely had time to react before they tackled him in a hug-powered assault, sending all three tumbling into a pile of leaves, laughter, and tangled limbs. Drew watched in horror. Meera watched in silent amusement. Arvind observed with scholarly interest. Nagini, meanwhile, was highly entertained. Your offspring are enthusiastic, she noted to Meera and Arvind, completely ignoring Drew. They certainly are, Meera agreed. Watch. Hing her daughters chat excitedly at a slightly overwhelmed Harry. Drew, however, was having a crisis. "This is fine," he muttered. "This is normal. It's not like my job is a serious one. No, let's all just run around in the jungle with giant snakes and Britain's biggest international incident. Everything is just fine." Nagini still ignored him, while the children ran through the mangrove, jumping over roots and climbing trees like it was the best day of their lives. The adults settled onto a wide, flat tree root that functioned as a natural bench. "They are adaptable," Nagini noted, watching the twins with mild curiosity. "They trust easily." "Children do," Mira replied. "Especially when they sense kindness." Nagini tilted her great head. "Kindness is not always a survival trait." "No," Mira admitted, "but neither is fear." Quote. Drew, meanwhile, sat with his head in his hands, muttering softly. "Something troubling you, Inspector?" Arvind asked, far too amused for Drew's liking. Drew sighed deeply. "I did not wake up today expecting to be a glorified babysitter for a boy raised by a snake, twin whirlwind 7-year-olds, and the living embodiment of my stress levels." Nagini turned to him for the first time. Her golden eyes filled with something bordering on pity. "You struggle, Dhruv Kashyap," she mused. "I do," Dhruv exclaimed. "I really do. I did not sign up to be Harry Potter's personal wrangler. I have an actual job, you know. I chase criminals. I enforce magical law. I do not deal with this. And yet you are here," Nagini noted serenely. "Yes, because somehow, I always end up in the middle of this madness." Dhruv threw up his hands. "I should just get a plaque made. Auror Inspector Dhruv Kashyap, official middleman of Harry Potter and his enormous mother." Arvind, unable to hold back any longer, laughed. Even Mira let out a chuckle. Dhruv groaned and slumped forward. "I hate all of you." Nagini, very deliberately, turned away from him again. And so, as the sun set over the mangrove, and the sound of children's laughter echoed through the trees, Dhruv Kashyap accepted his fate. Chapter 12. The Grand Chamber of Headmistress Vasuki's office exemplified the convergence of arcane engineering and architectural antiquity, its walls adorned with golden inlays depicting intricate serpentine motifs. The chamber, housed at the pinnacle of the Naga Cetra Vidyalai's ziggurat, functioned not only as a locus of governance but also as an enduring monument to India's esoteric pedagogical traditions. Through the towering windows, the expanse of the conch-eeled pocket-dimensional city lay sprawled beneath, its infrastructure a self-sustaining ecosystem of academia, commerce, and cultural preservation. At the center of this sanctum, Vasuki, the formidable Lamia-Naga hybrid, reclined with effortless regularity, her slit-pupiled golden eyes scrutinizing the woman seated across from her. The serpentine appendages adorning her head shifted with an almost sentient awareness, attuned to the latent energy suffusing the air. Mira Patil, a scholar of potions and healing, sat with measured composure, embodying the precise balance of intellect and restraint. However, the matter at hand was neither alchemical nor medical. It was the unprecedented custodianship and development of a singular magical anomaly, Harry Potter. Vasuki's clawed fingers interlaced, her tone deliberate. "You have observed the child personally, Mira. An unembellished assessment is required." Mira inhaled briefly before delivering her report. "Harry Potter represents a deviation from conventional magical development models. Despite his complete absence from structured pedagogy, he exhibits an extraordinary degree of adaptive cognition, kinesthetic intelligence, and intrinsic magical attunement. His neurodevelopment appears symbiotic with his environment. He moves not as a foreign entity in the jungle but as one fundamentally integrated into its magical framework." Vasuki's gaze remained impassive, though an almost imperceptible flicker of intrigue suggested she was assimilating the implications of such findings. "And his guardian?" Mira's response was weighed with deliberation. "Nagini is an outlier in known cases of maledictus transformations. She does not simply protect the child, she has established an immutable imprint upon him. Their relationship is neither dictated by conventional human parental structures nor mere magical bonds. It is primal, absolute. To the boy, she is not a guardian, she is his progenitor in every meaningful capacity." Vasuki's forked tongue flicked briefly, the sound akin to a contemplative hum. "As I anticipated." Mira inclined her head slightly. "You foresaw this." A cryptic smile traced Vasuki's lips. "One does not foster human Survival in a biosphere is lethal as the mangrove without an evolved methodology of nurture and magic. Nagini, once human, has now become something far more archetypal, a force outside rigid anthropocentric definitions. Yet, even for a being such as herself, raising a child, this child introduces an entirely new ontological paradigm. Mira exhaled sharply. You seek an audience with her. Vasu. He's expression conveyed inevitability rather than mere intent. Indeed, if the boy is to be integrated into Naga Cetra Vidyalaya, I must comprehend the full spectrum of his formative influences. Era considered the ramifications for a moment before nodding. I will facilitate the encounter. But a warning. Nagini perceives intrusion as threat. Vasuki exhaled in quiet amusement, the enchanted too. RCHES flickering in response to her mirth. As do I. Silence momentarily reigned before Vasuki's expression sharpened with resolution. This will not be a diplomatic overture in the traditional sense. It will be a paradigmatic negotiation between two entities whose existences defy standard magical taxonomies. The arcane pull of portkey transference released Headmistress Vasuki into the humid threshold of the mangroves established research outpost. The look on Inspector Drew's face was amusing as she told him that this was a school visit, causing the clearly overworked and underpaid auror to groan in exasperation. The transition between dimensions carried an almost subliminal charge, as if the very fabric of the location pulsed in resonance with something ancient and aware. The site, once a makeshift expeditionary camp, had since evolved into a semi-permanent operational base, structured with defensive enchantments and academic infrastructure. Newt Scamander and Tina Scamander, the foremost magizoologists of their generation, were presently engaged in methodical discourse with the Bhopal-based magizoologists Arvind Iyer and Reena Deshmukh. Their collective focus remained affixed upon a floating, rune-etched field parchment, detailing ethological observations and cryptic ecological signatures. Vasuki's attention, however, bypassed the intellectual preoccupations of the scientific assembly and landed upon the colossal serpentine entity coiled within the gnarled root system of an ancient mangrove tree. Nagini, her obsidian-hued scales, gleaming under the diffused sunlight filtering through the dense canopy, appeared less like a physical form and more like a phenomenon of shadow and sinew intertwined with the earth itself. The sheer imposing magnitude of her form did not evoke threat but rather an incontrovertible assertion of presence. A being not merely inhabiting this domain but intrinsically woven into its very magical topology. Their gazes met golden against golden, not in hostility, but in a calibrated exchange of cognizance. Vasuked unperturbed as she advanced with deliberate poise, her movements akin to the measured cadence of an uncoiling verdict. Nagini, she greeted, the intonation of her voice imbued with a resonance older than language itself. We have matters to discuss. The colossal serpent shifted, a slow, deliberate motion that signified neither acquiescence nor resistance. Headmistress Vasuki, Nagini responded, her voice an auditory silk of measured intensity. You have ventured far. Vasuki's golden eyes gleamed with subtle amazement as she regarded Nagini's immense form. With practiced ease, she settled onto a thick, gnarled root, her coiled tail subtly adjusting for balance. A slow, knowing smile played across her lips. Before we address the matter of the child, it is imperative that you comprehend the full scope of Naga Cetra Vidyalaya. Nagini tilted her head ever so slightly, the motion serpentine in its grace. Then speak. Vasuki's voice was measured, deliberate, carrying the resonance of centuries-old authority. Naga Cetra Vidyalaya is not simply an educational institution, it is a self-sustaining city, concealed within a meticulously warded pocket dimension deep in the heart of the Indian jungle. This is not merely a place of learning, it is a center of magical and academic convergence, where discipline, both arcane and mundane, are studied in equal measure. Unlike the Eurocentric model, which myopically focuses on spellcasting as the sole metric of competency, we acknowledge that true mastery requires holistic education. Nagini's forked tongue flicked, as though tasting the weight of Vasuki's words. Muggle studies. Vasuki inclined her head. Mathematics, physics, alchemy, philosophy, history, linguistics. A practitioner must not exist in isolation from the world in which they live. Our graduates emerge as scholars, innovators, and leaders capable in both the magical and non-magical realms. She paused. allowing the gravity of her words to settle before continuing. Our curriculum spans 10 years, beginning at the age of 9. The city exists not only to house education but to nurture development, foster autonomy, and cultivate responsibility. Nagini's coils tightened slightly in thought. Family. Yes, Vasuki confirmed smoothly. We do not sever students from their roots, Like certain institutions. Her voice carried an unmistakable note of derision, though she did not deign to name Hogwarts explicitly, where detachment from one's origins is mistaken for independence. Here, each child undergoes a welcoming ritual, binding them to the protective enchantments of the school, granting them an assigned residence within the city. Their families, both magical and non-magical, retain the right to visit, stay, and remain involved in their education. Nagini's expression remained inscrutable, yet there was a glimmer of consideration in her piercing gaze. A far cry from the prison some call schools. Vasuki's lips curved into something resembling satisfaction. Indeed, she continued, not only that, the city is self-sustaining, the classes that help with the agricultural side of education help produce the needed foods, spices, vegetables and more within the school limits. Not only that, shops, libraries, restaurants and more are located within the school city, while also housing a bank that is connected to the Naga Ratna Bank. Meaning that Mr. Potter can access his funds while on school property so he doesn't miss anything. She leaned forward, her tone quiet, yet unmistakably resolute. Harry Potter's fate is now woven into the fabric of India's magical lineage. If he is to be educated, it must be within our traditions, our safeguards, our sovereignty. You understand this? Nagini exhaled, the sound reverberating through the tangled roots and damp air, a low, contemplative hiss of acknowledgement. Yes, I understand. Meanwhile, Harry Potter was engaged in an acrobatic traversal of the mangrove subterranean topography, specifically the vaulted underside of a waterfall-carved cavern lip. His bare hands and feet found purchase against the moss-laden rock. His movements a seamless integration of gravity-defying control and biomechanical efficiency. Suspended adjacent to him, a Noctilus gigantus, a species of dire-sized, social chiropteran FL. Uttered with a leisurely adjustment of its membranous wings, mirroring the boy's equilibrium adaptive locomotion. Below, stationed at the periphery of the Cascade Basin, Newt's commander, China's commander, and the two Bhopal magizoologists engaged in diligent documentation, each furnishing their field notes with observations bordering on incredulity. China, arms crossed, articulated the fundamental Sion. How is he not experiencing circulatory dysregulation from prolonged inversion? Newt, peering through enchanted spectroscopic lenses, was positively euphoric. This is beyond mere physical conditioning. His vestibular system, gravitational adaptability, even his proprioception defy conventional anthropological baselines. I suspect an evolved neuromagical integration with his environment. Arvind, flipping through his annotated field journal, glanced between Harry and the Noctilus. Is it biological mimicry, an adaptive magical response, or something entirely anomalous? Rena, quill poised, offered a succinct analysis. Likely all three. Harry, oblivious to the scientific intrigue surrounding him, remained utterly engrossed in the kinesthetic synchrony of his aerial companion's content. Within a world that had long since ceased to distinguish him from its native inhabitants. China exhaled sharply, shifting her gaze toward Newt. You realize, of course, that you're going to have to draft an entirely new magizoological compendium to account for him. Newt's response was immediate, already underway. Chapter 13. The air within the grand courtyard of Naga Cetra Vidyalaya crackled with ancient magic. The towering ziggurat at the heart of the city. School casting long shadows as dusk settled over the hidden realm. 60 wide-eyed 9-year-olds stood in neat rows upon the vast, rune-etched stone floor. Their expressions a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and awe. Above them, suspended from intricately carved columns, countless glowing serpentine wards shimmered like constellations against the twilight sky, pulsating in rhythmic harmony with the arcane energy flowing through the school's foundation. At the center of the grand platform stood Headmistress Vasuki, her imposing figure cloaked in flowing ceremonial robes of emerald and obsidian, her golden, slit-pupiled eyes surveying the gathered students with measured intensity. Behind her, the 36 faculty Members of Naga Cetra stood in dignified silence, their hands clasped before them in solemn preparation. To Vasuki's right stood a tall, broad-shouldered man with grizzled features and sharp, assassin. Blue Eyes Deputy Headmaster Eamon Terrace, a former field officer of the American Rentier Institute, now an integral part of the school's leadership. Vasuki's voice, rich and commanding, resonated through the courtyard. Her words imbued with the weight of tradition. Welcome, new initiates, to Naga Cetra Vidyalaya, the seat of magical scholarship and mastery. You stand now at the threshold of knowledge and transformation. Here, you will not merely learn magic, you will embody it, weave it into your very being, and walk the path of wisdom laid down by those who came before. Her gaze swept over the students, lingering momentarily on a few who already radiated quiet determination. This is a place of discipline, exploration, and enlightenment. You will find no hand-holding here, no coddling. You will be tested, you will grow, and if you persevere, you will emerge as scholars, warriors, and leaders, ready to shape the world. Eamon Terrace stepped forward, his presence exuding the hard-edged edge of a man who had lived a life beyond classrooms and libraries, in the field where magic was not merely studied, but wielded in survival and battle. This institution is unlike any other, he said. His American accent clip prepare you for both the magical and non-magical worlds. Your curriculum will challenge you in ways you cannot yet imagine. But remember this, you are not alone. The faculty behind me, the students beside you, and the very foundations of this city will aid you, should you be worthy of the knowledge you seek. Vasuki inclined her head slightly in agreement before raising her clawed hand, signaling the final and most sacred part of the welcoming ceremony. The entire school seemed to still as the new students were ushered toward the center of a massive ritual circle carved deep into the stone. The carvings, filled with liquid silver runes, pulsed with an ancient energy, awaiting activation. The faculty, including Vasuki and Eamon, moved as one, stepping forward to encircle the initiates. Without hesitation, each of the 36 professors, the deputy headmaster, and finally the headmistress herself, raised their hands and sliced their palms, allowing a single drop of blood to fall into the engraved sigils. The moment Vasuki's crimson offering met the stone, the entire courtyard erupted in golden brilliance. A flash of searing light surged through the ritual carvings, racing outward like veins of molten gold. The intricate wards woven into the very fabric of the city school flared to life, responding to the renewed bond between the institution and its newest members. The energy rose to a crescendo, the city itself seeming to hum with power, and then silence. As the light dimmed, the initiates gasped, staring in awe as they felt the subtle shift within them, a connection to Naga Cetra Vidyalaya, a recognition by the very magic of the school that they now belonged. And then, in unison, the upper-year students, faculty, and staff erupted into cheers. The air vibrated with excitement, welcoming shouts echoing through the ancient halls and streets of the city. Older students called out to their new peers, offering grins and knowing nods. Facu. LTY members regarded the initiates with quiet approval, some murmuring among themselves about promising potential. The overwhelming warmth of acceptance settled over the courtyard like a comforting spell. Vasuki allowed the cheers to ring out before lifting a hand, calling for quiet once more. Her golden eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she surveyed the newest additions to Naga Cetra Vidyalaya. Your journey has begun, she declared. You have 1 month to familiarize yourselves with the city, acquire your books, and settle into your assigned residences. Learn the streets, explore the halls. Understand that this place is not just a school, it is a living, breathing entity that will test and nurture you in equal measure. Her tone grew sharper, the gravity of her words undeniable. Do not waste this time. When your studies begin, you will not be granted leniency. Prepare yourselves. Amon's arms crossed as he regarded the students with a knowing smirk. And if any of you get lost, don't expect the school to lead you back. It enjoys a challenge. Some of the older students laughed knowingly, while the new initiates exchanged uncertain glances. Vasuki's gaze lingered on the crowd for a moment longer before she gave a final nod. Welcome to Naga Cetra Vidyalaya. May your minds be sharp, your magic strong, and your will unbreakable. With that, the formal ceremony was concluded. The students, both new and old, slowly began dispersing, excitement crackling in the air as they ventured forth into the vast, living city that was now their home. The Grand Council chamber of Naga K's. Cetra Vidyalaya hummed with quiet discussion as faculty members settled into their seats. The annual welcoming ritual had been successfully completed, the school's wards had been reinforced, and now the first staff meeting of the academic year was underway. At the head of the circular chamber, Headmistress Vasuki sat with poised authority, her golden, slit-pupiled eyes scanning the gathered scholars. To her right, Deputy Headmaster Amon Terrace, a former field officer of the American Rentier Institute, leaned forward slightly, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The air was charged with anticipation, and it did not take long for the most pressing topic to arise. Of course, Vasuki thought the 2-year anticipation of adding Harry Potter to the school was worth it. She saw the look on boy's face as it turned into childish wonder. Yes, it was worth the wait. So, began Professor Amarachandra, a battle magic instructor, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. How do we intend to address the presence of the most notorious 9-year-old in our institution? A ripple of amusement and intrigue passed through the room. Vasuki turned to Mira Patil, one of the potion mistresses, second instructor of potions, and head of healing magics. Mira, if you would. Mira gave a composed nod, adjusting the sleeves of her intricately embroidered robes before addressing the assembly. As you are all aware, Harry Potter and his guardian, Nagini, have been fully integrated into the school's warding system. Given their unique residence within the mangrove, structural modifications were necessary to extend the school's magical protections, allowing them seamless access while maintaining the integrity of our existing defenses. This adjustment ensures that both Harry and Nagini remain securely connected to Naga Cetra. And what of Nagini herself? Inquired Professor Jitendra, an arithmancy and warding specialist. Will she continue to reside primarily in the mangrove? Mira cast a glance at Vasuki, who gave a slight nod before answering. Nagini has formally requested to pursue advanced studies here at Naga Cetra Vidyalaya. As you all know, the institution provides high R-level magical education for those seeking specialization beyond traditional schooling. She has expressed interest in expanding her formal understanding of magic, particularly in disciplines that were previously inaccessible to her. The murmurs of curiosity and enthusiasm grew louder. It was highly uncommon for both a child and their guardian to be enrolled as students at the same institution. The academic implications fascinated many. This is unprecedented, mused Professor Kalindi, a scholar of ancient magic and ritual theory. However, if she meets the requirements and is willing to adhere to our academic structure, she should be treated as any other postgraduate student. And Harry? Inquired Professor Surya, head of Transfiguration. Amon Terrace finally spoke, his voice measured and resolute. The boy is exceptional but untrained. He will be treated as any other student, no special treatment, no exceptions. His progress will be earned, not granted. There were several nods of approval. It is rare, Vasuki added, her tone as smooth as it was commanding, that we have the opportunity to educate both a mother and child within our institution simultaneously. This presents an unparalleled academic challenge, but also an extraordinary opportunity. I expect each of you to uphold the highest standards of education in this endeavor. The atmosphere shifted from mere curiosity to a collective determination. This was not simply an unusual case, it was an intellectual challenge, a test of their own expertise as educators. Vasuki allowed the moment to settle before giving a final nod. Prepare your syllabi accordingly. This year, we forge a new path. With that, the first faculty meeting of the year came to a close. The commercial heart of Naga Cetra Vidyalaya pulsed with energy as students, merchants, and scholars moved through its intricate avenues, their conversations weaving a tapestry of commerce and academia. Amidst this vibrant milieu, the Patil family, accompanied by Nagini and Harry, advanced toward the architectural marvel that was Naga Ratna Bank. Unlike the austere, fortress-like presence of Gringotts, this institution radiated an aura of esoteric grandeur and refined artistry. Its facade, a seamless fusion of pristine white marble and gilded filigree, bore elaborate serpentine motifs that seemed to shift subtly under sconces, suggesting a tent magic embedded within the very stone. 2 Naga sentinels stood poised at the grand entrance, their Ophidian lower halves coiled in disciplined readiness beneath them while their torsos were adore. Ned in ceremonial regalia denoting their station. Their vertically slit pupils flickered over the approaching party before one inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Welcome to Naga Ratna Bank," he intoned, his voice smooth, deliberate, and resonant, with the cadence of an ancient wisdom. "May prosperity guide your path, and discernment illuminate your choices." Upon entry, the sheer spatial majesty of the bank was immediately apparent. Its ceiling, enchanted to replicate the boundless night sky, shimmered with constellations that subtly shifted in accordance with their celestial counterparts. Unlike the rigid, transactional formality of Gringotts, the Naga bankers exhibited a fluid dynamism, their sinuous forms moving with effortless grace over floating platforms that drifted between levitating desks and arcane archives. A subtle undertone of sandalwood and myrrh lingered in the air, interwoven with the crisp scent of ancient parchment and alchemical ink, reinforcing the institution's atmosphere of measured sophistication. As they approached a principal reception dais, an emerald-scaled Naga banker unfurled herself from her position, her silk-embroidered robes rippling with every motion. Each delicate movement accentuated by the soft chime of gold adornments. Observing the arrivals with a composed yet inquisitive gaze, she spoke in a melodic, measured cadence. "Ah, distinguished visitors from the Bhopal branch, what business may the vaults of Naga Ratna facilitate today?" Arvind Patil, ever adept in matters of diplomacy, responded with a deferential nod. "We require a vault inspection and additional access permissions. The boy, Harry Potter, must be granted full fiduciary authority over his accounts." The banker's forked tongue flickered almost imperceptibly, sampling the ambient magic before she inclined her head in assent. "Indeed. Follow, and the vault shall yield to its rightful claimant." Where Gringotts relied upon archaic, breakneck speed minecart conveyances, Naga Ratna employed a far more sophisticated transport medium, enchanted carpets that hovered in seamless synchrony with the passengers' intent. The moment the party stepped onto one such carpet, it ascended with preternatural smoothness, gliding through expansive subterranean corridors, where crystalline stalactites pulsed with an inner bioluminescence. Below them, cascades of liquid starlight descended into mirror-like pools, their incandescent glow casting a surreal radiance over the cavern's carved pathways. "This is decidedly more civilized than minecarts," Mira Patil observed, her gaze lingering appreciatively on the ethereal scenery. Nagini, coiled with an ease that spoke of both familiarity and quiet amusement, emitted a low, sibilant hiss. "The goblins are masters of precision, yet they lack the inclination for artistry." Soon, they reached the designated vault chamber, where another Naga banker awaited. With a single arcane gesture, the intricately warded doors shimmered, the layers of protective enchantments peeling away like dissolving mist. As the doors yielded, the interior was revealed a meticulously arranged treasury of gold ingots, coinage, and enchanted relics, some of which hummed softly with dormant magic, waiting for their rightful wielder. "Your inheritance, safeguarded under the highest tenets of our institution," the Naga banker intoned, gesturing for Harry to step forward. Harry, still acclimating to the notion of such inherited affluence, surveyed the vault with quiet introspection. He turned toward Nagini, who responded with a slow, approving flick of her tail. "Your path is well secured, little one." As transactions were finalized and necessary authorizations bestowed, the party made their exit, escorted once more with the same graceful deference that defined the Naga Ratna experience. Stepping out into the vibrancy of the market district once more, Padma and Parvati's voices rose in eager speculation about their next venture, while Harry remained pensive, absorbing yet another facet of the intricate, multifaceted world that was now irrevocably his own. Upon reaching the streets of the Naga Cetra Vidyalaya shopping district, the group saw that the place was bustling with activity, the rhythmic hum of conversation blending with the scent of parchment, ink, and exotic spices from nearby apothecaries. Harry, flanked by Arvid, Mira Patil and their daughters, cast wide-eyed glances at the towering bookshelves within Vidya Mandira, the largest academic bookstore in the city school. Nagini, doing her best to not get in the way of other shoppers and students of the school, watched the scene with quiet curiosity. Mira led the way, her fingers skimming a carefully prepared shopping list. "All right, first on the list core non-magical coursework. Mathematics, science, literature, and history. You may be at a magical school, but that doesn't mean you neglect the fundamentals." Padma, who had already darted toward a nearby shelf, wrinkled her nose. But why do we need these subjects? We're here to learn magic. Mira turned, raising an eyebrow. Because magic does not exist in isolation. Mathematics sharpens the mind, NCE explains the world's underlying mechanics, and literature and history ensure you understand the people and cultures around you. The British might scoff at the idea, but we know better. She plucked a thick textbook from the shelf. Ah, here we go, Foundations of Universal Mathematics, by Arithmetica. And this one, The Living World, a study of natural and magical ecosystems, by Dr. Vadia Voridis. Harry tilted his head as he examined the books. He'd never heard of these names before, but they sounded important. He reached for a history book, its title embossed in shimmering gold, Chr. Onicles of the Hidden Realms, by Sita Bharadvaj. Now, Mira continued, moving to another section, we need books on meditation and occlumency. Your magical foundation starts with mental discipline. Harry's brows furrowed. Why do we need those before wands? Her lips quirked into a knowing smile. Because you're not getting wands until your second year. What? Parvati groaned. But wands are the most exciting part. Mira chuckled. And you'll appreciate them much more when you're ready. Magic is like building a house without a strong foundation, the whole structure is unstable. Meditation and occlumency help train your mind, discipline your emotions, and control your magical reserves. Otherwise, your magic is wild and unfocused. She plucked 2 more books from the shelf. The Sile, NT Mind, A Wizard's Guide to Mental Clarity, by Manas Vedic, and Shields of the Mind, An Introduction to Occlumency, by Professor Indra Vale. Nagini's tongue flickered as she observed the conversation, amusement glinting in her reptilian eyes. Harry, though initially hesitant, felt a flicker of understanding settle in his chest. If he had learned anything from living in the jungle, it was that patience and preparation always paid off. Mira glanced at the stack of books in her arms. All right, that should do it. Let's pay for these and grab some supplies. You have a month to settle in before classes begin, plenty of time to get started on your reading. Harry exhaled, already feeling the weight of his new academic journey ahead. Yet, as he looked around at the vibrant city school, he found D himself eager to take his first steps into this world of structured magic and boundless knowledge. Deputy Headmaster Eamon Terrace cut an imposing figure, his presence exuding the hardened resolve of a veteran field operative. Clad in the distinctive uniform of a Rentier Institute veteran, he was every bit the battle-worn hunter, a man who had seen the worst the world had to offer and lived to tell the tale. His attire was a carefully designed blend of function and intimidation, built for durability and survival in the most uns. His broad-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his sharp, weathered features. His eyes hidden beneath the rim like a predator surveying its domain. A heavy, reinforced coat of black and deep crimson wrapped around his frame, layered with armored plating on the should. RS and chest protection designed for both magical and mundane threats. The worn leather of his high-collared duster bore the scuffs and scars of countless encounters, the crimson trim a stark contrast against the darkness of the fabric. Amon's left arm, partially exposed beneath the coat, was encased in an intricate gauntlet of arcane and mechanical design, the metallic plating fused with conduits of enchanted energy that pulsed faintly with an eerie blue glow. The fingers of the gauntlet flexed smoothly, a testament to the precise craftsmanship, a tool equally suited for combat and utility. Across his torso, a bandolier of ammunition, vials, and enchanted cartridges was strapped securely, evidence of a man always prepared for the unexpected. At his waist, a well-worn gun belt carried 2 finely crafted revolvers, their intricate engravings marking them as weapons of both deadly efficiency and masterful artistry. The twin holsters were positioned for a quick draw, their grips wrapped in aged leather, molded to fit his hands through years of use. A larger firearm rested against his back, secured by a reinforced strap, a heavy-duty weapon meant for more formidable foes. His pants were thick, reinforced leather, segmented with protective plating at the thighs and knees, designed for both mobility and resilience. His boots, sturdy and travel-worn, were built for the treacherous terrains he had undoubtedly traversed. Their heavy soles caked with dust and grime from countless miles walked in pursuit of his duty. Everything about Eamon Terrace's uniform spoke of his experience. and who had lived through the crucible of battle, who had adapted and endured where others had fallen. The first-year students of Naga Cetra Vidyalaya stood at the boundary of the dense jungle, their expressions ranging from cautious curiosity to outright apprehension. The air was thick with humidity, and the distant calls of unseen wildlife only added to their uncertainty. Before them, Deputy Headmaster Amon Terrace stood resolute, his frame clad in the reinforced leather of a seasoned Rentier Institute operative. His gaze swept over the gathered children, scrutinizing them with the practiced eye of a veteran accustomed to far graver challenges than training a group of first years. "All right, listen up," Amon's voice carried the rough edge of authority. "You're here to learn magic, but before you can start tossing spells around, you need to understand one thing: your body is the foundation for your magic. If that foundation is weak, undisciplined, or fragile, then your magic will be, too." A few students exchanged uncertain glances, but Amon pressed on. "Most places won't let you near a wand until you're 11. Waste of time, if you ask me. Right now, you're raw material potential without structure. So before you can harness magic effectively, you need to develop the strength, endurance, and control to channel it properly." He rolled his shoulders, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "And that means physical conditioning." Several students groaned, only to fall silent under Amon's sharp stare. He jerked a thumb toward the jungle. "Your first task, a 5-mile obstacle course. Climb, crawl, sprint, whatever it takes to make it through. If you don't finish, well," his smirk widened, "you'll be running it again until you do." A shrill whistle cut through the humid air. "Move." The students hesitated only a moment before scrambling forward, some sprinting, others dragging their feet before reluctantly plunging into the jungle. Soon, the air was filled with the sounds of rustling undergrowth, muffled curses, and startled yelps as they stumbled over roots and uneven terrain. Amon crossed his arms, watching them disappear into the trees, shaking his head slightly. "They'll learn," he muttered to himself. An hour passed before the jungle yielded its first finisher. Harry Potter emerged from the foliage, barely winded, his untamed hair wilder than before but his expression unreadable. His breathing was steady, his posture relaxed. This was routine to him. Amon raised an eyebrow. "That was quick." Harry merely gave a nonchalant shrug, as though 5 miles of jungle terrain was no more taxing than a morning stroll. Given his upbringing, it probably wasn't. The next student staggered out nearly 20 minutes later, gasping for breath and covered in scrapes. One by one, the rest dragged themselves back, disheveled and exhausted. Amon handed Harry a water flask, watching the other students collapse into weary heaps. "Lesson 1's done. Tomorrow, we do it again faster," Amon announced, ignoring the collective groans. "Welcome to Naga Cetra Vidyalaya." Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Modern Magical Congress of the United States of America. Macusa operates under a bicameral system that incorporates representatives from all 50 states, ensuring that the vast diversity of magical cultures, traditions, and practices within the nation is represented. Each state elects 2 representatives, 1 male and 1 female, resulting in a total of 100 representatives who work alongside the Macusa president and their cabinet. This governing body collaborates with the non-magical government's president and cabinet to maintain order and cooperation between the 2 societies. The structure of Macusa reflects the complex nature of American magical governance, as it must balance state autonomy with federal oversight while addressing both domestic and international concerns within the magical world. Given the immense variation in magical customs across the United States, Macusa functions as a melting pot of ideologies, practices, and governance styles. Some states adhere to strict magical regulations, while others are more lenient in their magical applications, leading to frequent negotiations and compromises within the Congress. This diversity often leads to heated debates over issues such as magical education standards, international trade of magical goods, and the ethical use of magical creatures in various industries. However, one of the consistent and overriding concerns is the containment and management of supernatural threats, most notably the Sanguisuge menace. The Rentier Institute serves as an external watchdog over Macusa, ensuring that the organization does not fall under the influence of these predatory entities. Due to the Institute's military expertise and deep knowledge of supernatural entities, it frequently cooperates with Macusa's law enforcement divisions, particularly the Department of Magical Security, to eliminate emerging threats. Historically, the First Blood War ended with Jesse Rentier's decisive action in eliminating Felicity Diabano at the Chesterfield Opera House, saving then non-magical President Grover Cleveland. This event brought the Rentier Institute into the awareness of Macusa, prompting them to closely monitor the Institute's activities. However, it wasn't until 15 years later that tensions escalated dramatically when Ilvermorny was overtaken by a wizard-turned-sanguisuge, leading to the conversion of nearly 80% of the student body into familiars. The resulting crisis was catastrophic for the American magical world, as it not only destroyed one of the most prestigious wizarding schools in North America but also exposed significant weaknesses in Macusa's security apparatus. Jesse Rentier and his wife, Olivia Rentier, née Florence of Utah, led a brutal assault on the corrupted school in 1910, ultimately destroying Ilvermorny and eradicating the sanguisuge infestation. This event led Macusa to launch the infamous Obliviator hunts that lasted until 1912, during which suspected supernatural sympathizers were aggressively pursued and, in many cases, forcibly removed from positions of influence within magical society. As Professor Adams concluded lecture, he allowed his students time to record notes within the grand halls of his class building at Naga Cetra Vidal. The classroom, adorned with intricate carvings depicting legendary magical battles and cultural symbols from various traditions, served as an inspiring setting for the lesson. Among the students was Harry Potter, now 14 years old and in his 5th year at the institution. This year's curriculum focused on the history of Macusa and its unique relationship with the United States, particularly in how the Rentier Institute's war against the supernatural effectively exposed the magical world to the non-magical American government. This exposure, while controversial, led to increased cooperation between the two worlds, though not without significant resistance from more traditionalist factions within Macusa who opposed any form of collaboration with non-magical authorities. Now, does anyone want to explain how these hunts were started then were finally brought to an end? Professor Adams posed the question to the class, scanning the room before selecting Pavarti Patil, who had raised her hand. The Obliviator hunt started when the Oblivation Department of the former Macusa government tried to mass obliviate all of America. The Rentier Institute caught wind of his when an Obliviator agent was caught in the bedroom of the Rentier family, trying to obliviate Olivia. Jesse Rentier stopped this before the Institute started hunting magicals that wore the robes of that department. It was ended when the Rentier Institute stormed the Macusa headquarters. Specifically, Alexander Gravener Rentier, son of Jesse Rentier, led an incursion into the Macusa government building to dismantle its leadership. This, however, forced the Institute and the non-magical government of the time to try and rebuild the Macusa during the First World War. Thankfully, modern-day Macusa was reconstructed from the ground up with the combined efforts of the Rentier Institute and then-President Woodrow Wilson. The new structure emphasizes cooperation between magical and non-magical institutions, ensuring that future conflicts with supernatural entities could be handled in a more coordinated manner. Pavarti answered confidently. Professor Adams nodded in approval. Correct. The changes led directly into the Second Blood War, instigated by a coalition of dark wizards and the sanguisuge. As a result, the American magical community once again found itself in a protracted battle against supernatural forces, ultimately culminating in their involvement in the First World War. This era saw the rise of several key figures in magical history, including strategists, warriors, and diplomats who helped reshape the landscape of magical governance in America. Now, let's examine the structure of the newly reformed Macusa government and its impact on contemporary magical politics. There was a bell that sounded, which ended the class, much to the sounds of the groaning students as Professor Adams smiled. None of that now, we'll continue the lesson later as you all know. I want you to come back ready to learn the deeper workings of the Macusa government and various different states that fill its ranks. Harry walked with Padma and Parvati Patil toward the mangrove section of the city, where powerful magical wards seamlessly connected to his and Nagini's home. Their conversation, still centered on the lesson about Macusa's history, deepened as they considered how magical governance differed across the world. The more they learned, the clearer it became that every magical society had its own struggles and compromises. Macusa is nothing like the Ministry of Magic, Harry said, his brow furrowed in thought. The British Ministry and the ICW always tried to keep everything hidden, acting like nothing supernatural existed beyond wizards and magical creatures. But Macusa and especially the Rentier Institute actively fought against those things. It's strange to think about how different their priorities are. Parvati adjusted her book bag and nodded. It makes sense, though. Magic in America has always been more chaotic because every state has its own rules and traditions. Macusa has to find a way to keep them all working together, which isn't easy when the IR magical communities are so different from one another. Padma, always the analytical one, added, that's why the Rentier Institute has so much power. They make sure Macusa doesn't get taken over by supernatural forces. They were even willing to overthrow the government once. That shows just how serious they are about maintaining order. But it also means Macusa has to be careful not to let them get too powerful. Harry sighed, kicking a loose stone on the path. I get that they needed to act, but it's still a scary thought. An entire magical school was destroyed because of that war. Sure, Hogwarts has been through battles. But nothing on that scale. Ilvermorny was wiped out, and it took them decades to rebuild a proper magical education system. Can you imagine if something like that happened to us? Parvati gave him a pointed look. Like we don't have our own problems. The magical world is never peaceful, no matter where you go. You of all people should know that. Conflicts between magical factions are always bubbling under the surface. As they reached the mangrove section, the scenery transformed. Towering trees with twisted, sprawling roots created a natural barrier, their branches weaving together like protective arms. The bark of the largest trees shimmered faintly with glowing runes, pulsing in time with the warding magic that protected this part of the city. The scent of salt, damp earth, and rich greenery filled the air, and the distant sound of water gently lapping against the mangrove roots created a soothing, rhythmic backdrop. A massive hollowed-out mangrove tree stood before them, its interior converted into a beautifully crafted home for the Pottle twins. Soft lantern light glowed through curved wooden windows, casting warm, golden light onto the surrounding vegetation. Vines draped over the entrance like natural curtains, and flowers in vibrant shades of orange and blue bloomed from the carefully maintained garden surrounding the base of the tree. It looked cozy, welcoming almost like something out of a storybook. Parvati turned to him with a teasing smirk. Are you sure you don't want a real roof over your head, Harry? We've got space. Yo. You don't have to play wild jungle boy all the time. Harry chuckled and shook his head. No thanks. I like sleeping outside. It feels more natural, and I can keep an eye on things better that way. I've never been one for walls and roofs. Padma rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. Just don't start complaining when the rainy season hits and you wake up soaked to the bone. You might love the jungle, but even you can't escape a monsoon. Harry grinned, unconcerned. I'll figure something out. Maybe Nagini will let me curl up with her if it gets too bad. Parvati laughed. I doubt it. She likes her space more than you do. They walked a little further, enjoying the tranquil atmosphere. Small, luminescent insects hovered in the air, flitting between the flowering vines and hovering near the softly glowing runes. The mangrove section of the city was unlike any other, alive with both natural and magical energy, an ecosystem in perfect harmony with its inhabitants. It's strange, isn't it? Padma mused. How different this place is from everything we've ever known. We're being trained for a world that doesn't follow the same rules as Britain's magical society. Harry nodded. Yeah, but maybe that's a good thing. If I had stayed in Britain, I wouldn't have gotten to decide what kind of wizard I want to be. Parvati smiled. Well, whatever you decide, you're stuck with us now. Albus D. Dumbledore sat in the stately meeting chamber of the British Ministry of Magic, his twinkling blue eyes scanning the assembled dignitaries with quiet interest. The air in the room carried the weight of diplomacy. An intricate dance of politics, an international cached mahogany table, adorned with ministry seals and enchanted quills, served as the focal point for the discussion, a place where words could shape the future of magical relations. At the head of the table, Cornelius Fudge, the British Minister for Magic, adjusted his ever-present bowler hat and straightened his deep green robes. His fingers drummed anxiously on the table, betraying his nerves. To his right, Samuel Prescott, the president of Macusa, sat with the air of a man accustomed to authority. He was sharp-eyed, his movements precise, his demeanor exuding the structured efficiency for which American magical governance was known. Seated next to him was Headmaster Jonathan Whitmore of Rentier Cleveland University, one of the most formidable magical institutions in the United States, its curriculum renowned for its emphasis on practical magic, supernatural combat training, and historical studies of magical warfare. Across the table, the South Korean delegation sat in composed silence. Minister Choi Sang-woo, a man of careful deliberation and diplomatic finesse, had his hands clasped before him, his crisp robes immaculately pressed. He was a statesman of keen intellect, known for his methodical leadership within South Korea's magical government. Beside him sat Headmaster Park Yun-sok of Gwaneum Academy of Sorcery, a school famous for its rigorous training in martial magic, spiritual discipline, and its seamless fusion of Eastern magical traditions. He sat with an unreadable expression, his eyes keenly observing the proceedings without offering much in the way of visible reaction. Dumbledore, ever the mediator, folded his hands before him, his expression warm and diplomatic. The matter at hand was the Triwizard Tournament, an event of great historical significance. Designed as a means of fostering international magical cooperation, the tournament had seen centuries of competition among Europe's most prestigious magical schools. However, the landscape had changed. Durmstrang Institute and Beauxbatons Academy of Magic, two of the tournament's traditional competitors, had formally declined to participate. A great shame, Dumbledore mused, but not an insurmountable obstacle. In their place, Gwaneum Academy and Rentier Cleveland University had agreed to enter the competition. While some at the ministry had viewed this as a setback, Dumbledore saw potential. The inclusion of these two powerful institutions presented a unique opportunity and exchange of magical philosophies that would challenge Hogwarts students in ways they had never experienced. Rentier Cleveland, with its pragmatic approach to magic and battle-hardened curriculum, would introduce a level of calculated aggression and practical defense that Hogwarts students rarely encountered. On the other hand, Gwaneum Academy's focus on martial magic and spiritual harmony would provide a stark contrast, emphasizing balance, precision, and control. Fudge had taken the floor, his voice carrying the usual pomposity as he outlined the logistics of integrating the new competitors into Hogwarts. He spoke at length about security concerns, lodging arrangements, and the scheduling of the events. Prescott listened carefully, his fingers tapping out a rhythmic beat on the table, an absent-minded habit that revealed his mind was already working ahead. Minister Choi, ever composed, posed several measured questions regarding safety measures and the magical contracts that would bind the tournament's participants. Headmaster Park, though silent for much of the discussion, nodded occasionally, his presence alone commanding respect. Dumbledore allowed himself a small smile, leaning back slightly in his chair as he steepled his fingers. This meeting, he mused, was merely the first in a long series of international negotiations. The Triwizard Tournament, though a competition in name, would serve as much more than a showcase of magical prowess. It would be a proving ground for alliances, a stage upon which the next generation of witches and wizards would forge relationships that could shape the future of magical cooperation. And, of course, it was an opportunity for each school to demonstrate its unique strengths. His gaze flickered briefly to Prescott, who had finally spoken, his deep voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to command. Macusa sees this as an important step toward strengthening transatlantic relations. Rentier Cleveland has a reputation to uphold, and we don't take our commitments lightly. Rest assured, our students will enter this tournament with the same level of discipline and readiness that has made our institution a pillar of magical education. Minister Choi responded in kind, his tone calm but firm. Gwaneum Academy has trained sorcerers for centuries, and we believe this tournament will serve as a valuable learning experience for all involved. However, our focus is not solely on competition. We seek mutual understanding between our students and yours. The world of magic is vast, and collaboration is the key to growth. Dumbledore nodded approvingly. Indeed, if history has taught us anything, it is that cooperation between magical institutions strengthens us all. The lessons learned in this tournament will extend far beyond the competition itself. Fudge, sensing the mood of the room, quickly jumped in. Yes, quite right. This is an excellent opportunity for our students to exchange ideas and magical practices. Now, about the specifics of the tournament's security measures. As the conversation shifted back to logistics, Dumbledore allowed his mind to wander momentarily, considering the broader implications of the changes unfolding before him. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang's refusal to participate was telling. Perhaps they harbored doubts about the tournament's safety, or perhaps their priorities had simply shifted. Either way, it marked a change in the political landscape of magical education. And now, with South Korea and the United States stepping forward, a new era of international collaboration was beginning to take shape. Though the finer details still needed to be settled, Dumbledore could already see the paths forming ahead. The Triwizard Tournament would not merely be a contest of magical skill, it would be a convergence of philosophies, ideologies, and traditions. In that, at least, he saw promise. For now, however, agreements needed to be finalized, details arranged, and preparations set in motion. With a composed expression, he turned his full attention back to the discussion, offering his insight where needed, even the watchful orchestrator of events yet to unfold. Sirius Black sat in the dimly lit study of Black Manor, his fingers idly tapping against the arm of his chair. Across from him, Arcturus Black, his grandfather and former head of House Black, studied him with the sharp gaze of a man who had spent decades navigating the treacherous world of pureblood politics. A glass of aged fire whiskey rested untouched between them, its amber liquid reflecting the flickering candlelight. Harry's grades are exceptional, Sirius began, breaking the silence. His professors at Naga Cetra Vidal have nothing but praise for his magical aptitude and discipline. His health is just as good, better than I expected. Given the way he was raised before Nagini took him in, the jungle life has made him strong. Arcturus gave a slow nod of approval. That is reassuring to hear. The boy was dealt a difficult hand, but it seems he has thrived. Naga Cetra is an excellent institution, far superior to Hogwarts in many respects. He is receiving an education befitting a member of the Black family. Sirius exhaled, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. Arcturus's approval was no small thing. Though they had their differences, his grandfather's wisdom was undeniable. But before Sirius could bask in the rare moment of agreement, Arcturus continued. There is another matter, one that may soon demand our attention. The Triwizard Tournament is being revived. Sirius groaned, rubbing his temples. Of course it is, because nothing says prunity like throwing students into life-threatening situations for sport. Arcturus smirked. Indeed, but this time, the competition will be different. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang have declined to participate. Instead, Guanium Academy and Rentier Cleveland University will be joining Hogwarts. This shift will have considerable political ramifications. Sirius frowned. So Harry will be eligible to compete. Yes, but whether he will be selected remains to be seen. Regardless, the tournament itself is not our only concern. Arcturus's expression darkened slightly. Lucius Malfoy is in Azkaban. Sirius's brows rose, caught off guard by the sudden shift in topic. What? Since when? Arthur Weasley saw Lucius slip that cursed diary into his daughter's books. Holding a Class 10 dark object is an inexcusable crime, even for a Malfoy. The evidence was undeniable. His trial was swift, and he was sentenced accordingly. Sirius let out a low whistle. I can't say I'm surprised. But that's going to send ripples through high society. The Malfoy name has lost its influence practically overnight. Arcturus inclined his head, which brings us to Narcissa. With Lucius incarcerated, he has broken the marriage contract. As such, Narcissa is once again a Black. Sirius closed his eyes and took a slow, measured breath. Lovely. So now I have to deal with that, too. You are head of House Black, Arcturus reminded him, which means handling family matters, however inconvenient they may be. Sirius let out a dry chuckle. Oh, I'm well aware. Just once, I'd like a day W. Here I don't have to untangle some political mess. Arcturus gave him a knowing look. Then you should have been born into another family. Sirius huffed but ultimately nodded. Fine, I'll handle it, but don't expect me to throw Narcissa a welcome back party. I wouldn't dream of it, Arcturus said with a ghost of a smile. Now, let us discuss what comes next for the House of Black. Chapter 16. Again. Potter. Emerson, go again. Professor Amarachandra, the teacher of battle magics, barked, as the two 14-year-olds went at one another again. Harry growled like some jungle cat before flushing his gauntlets with magic, which summoned his battle armor. A surge of arcane energy enveloped him in a radiant flash of cerulean light, momentarily distorting the surrounding air with a rippling wave of raw magical force. As the luminescence subsided, he emerged clad in an artifact of unparalleled craftsmanship and armor not merely forged, but woven from the very essence of ancient enchantments. The armor's surface shimmered with an intricate interplay of ivory, cobalt, and gilded gold, its composition defying conventional metallurgy. The chestplate, adorned with labyrinthine golden etchings, pulsed rhythmically with latent energy, as though responding to an unseen current of power. Angular pauldrons extended outward, yet they did not remain rigidly fixed, rather, they hovered just above the shoulders, their positioning subtly recalibrating with every shift in Harry's stance. This principle of segmented levitation extended throughout the armor's entire construction, enabling magi to flow unimpeded through an unseen lattice of interconnected arcane conduits. The gauntlets, however, stood as the most distinctive components of the ensemble, each an artifact of divergent magical philosophy. The right gauntlet, hewn from an ancient bronze alloy, bore intricate carvings reminiscent of organic tendrils interwoven with archaic glyphs. At its core, an emerald gemstone radiated an eerie glow, resonating with a deep, untapped reservoir of power. With but a mere invocation of intent, the gem's energy coalesced into a teardrop-shaped blade of viridescent fire, its edges crackling with barely contained magical entropy. The left gauntlet, conversely, was an exercise in refined magical precision. A seamless extension of the armor's primary aesthetic, it housed a counterpart gem stone, this one suffused with an otherworldly azure light. Upon activation, it too conjured a blade of living energy, but where its twin radiated raw, untamed potency, this one exuded a calculated, controlled brilliance. The two weapons, though symmetrical in form, embodied diametrically opposed magical principles, one primal, the other methodical, creating a dynamic oscillation that harmonized through Harry's attunement to the armor itself. The leg guards and boots adhered to the same floating plate design philosophy, their modular components subtly adjusting to optimize movement. Embedded sapphire gemstones within the greaves periodically discharged faint pulses of magical energy, leaving ephemeral trails of residual light in his wake. This was not merely armor, it was an extension of Harry's will. A symbiotic interface between sorcerer and spell-forged artifact. Every facet of the armor, from the regal, crested helmet to the floating segments that danced in synchrony with his movements, was designed for far more than passive protection. It functioned as both a conduit and amplifier, augmenting Harry's magical prowess while offering an unparalleled defense against all who dared oppose him. This was not a relic of a bygone era, it was a living testament to the apex of magical warfare, a construct imbued with the essence of power itself. Not only that, the phrase that had become synonymous with Harry was something that the language professor along with Newt and Tina became surprised by. In the time he had been at school, they had discovered more of a very advanced magical civilization that spoke a near ethereal language that didn't translate easily unless it was through the power of magic. The phrase was something this people lived by, for the word used for magic was auror. And when Harry spoke it with such fervor, that every magical felt it in her heart, in his gut, in their very bones. A phrase that left no doubt in how true the phrase is. My life, Harry growled, his voice vibrating with power. For ire. Harry surged forward, his movements a blur, the twin energy blades crackling with raw magic as they sliced through the air. Shiva Amerson barely had time to react, throwing himself to the side as one of Harry's blades cut a deep gash into the stone platform where he had just stood. Sparks erupted from the impact, molten streaks glowing along the edges of the cut. Shiva retaliated immediately, flicking his wand in a tight arc, sending a barrage of hexes at Harry. Stunners, disarming charms, and a cutting curse. Each spell was expertly aimed, but none found their mark. Instead, they fizzled against the shimmering shield of raw, magical energy that flared to life around Harry's form. Without breaking stride, Harry stepped inside Shiva's casting range, bringing his left blade down in a diagonal arc. Shiva twisted, barely evading the lethal strike, and used the moment to conjure a stone pillar between them. The obstacle lasted only a second before Harry slammed his foot into it, shattering the construct into flying debris. Shiva raised his wand to cast again, but Harry was already there. A sharp knee to the ribs sent Shiva skidding backward, his breath knocked from his lungs. Harry did not let up. He pursued, his footfalls echoing as he lunged, spinning midair to bring both of his weapons down with unrelenting force. Shiva barely managed to raise a shimmering blue shield in time, the impact sending visible shockwaves outward, but the sheer force drove him to his knees. His wand vibrated in his grip as his hastily conjured shield flickered and fractured under the relentless pressure. Realizing he couldn't hold Harry off in close quarters, Shiva took a desperate gamble. He rolled away, flicking his wand at the ground, transfiguring the arena floor into an unstable sinkhole beneath Harry's feet. The jungle-raised boy reacted instinctively, flipping mid-air and catching the edge of the stone with his fingertips. In a feat of sheer athleticism, he propelled himself back up, landing in a crouch just as Shiva unleashed a gout of blue flame in his direction. Harry moved before thought, his right gauntlet flaring green as fire, parting it like a blade through water. He kicked off the ground, closing the distance once more, feinting left before pivoting into a spinning kick that caught Shiva across the jaw. The impact sent Shiva airborne before he crashed against the boundary of the arena, dazed and gasping. Before the boy could recover, Harry dashed forward, twisting into an upward slash that would have ended the fight. Had Shiva not reflexively apparated 3 feet away in a burst of silver sparks. But the effort cost him. Sweat dripped from his brow, his limbs sluggish as exhaustion began to set in. Panting, Eva raised his wand for one last attempt, pouring everything he had into a concentrated, high-powered stunning spell. The golden jet of magic hurtled toward Harry only to dissipate against his shield. Before Shiva could react, Harry closed the final gap and drove his palm into the boy's chest, a blast of force sending him tumbling out of the designated arena boundary. Shiva hit the ground hard and did not rise. The arena fell silent, save for Harry's own heavy breathing. As the last remnants of battle magic dissipated, his armor flickered before vanishing, the exertion of prolonged combat catching up to him. His legs nearly buckled, but he caught himself before he could fall. Professor Amarachandra strode forward, his expression unreadable as he glanced between his 2 students. Then, with a satisfied nod, he muttered, "Good." He gestured toward Shiva, who remained sprawled on the ground. "I'll wake up Amerson. You, Potter, go home and take a bath. I'm sure Nagini will be pleased with your progress on that interesting armor of yours." Harry smirked, shaking his head as he wiped sweat from his brow. Yeah, though, I think it's funny that my mom wants to be a healer." Still chuckling to himself, he turned and left the training arena, already envisioning the look on his mother's serpentine face when she inevitably fussed over his bruises. Nagini lay coiled atop a massive S-tone slab that was embedded into the gnarled roots of the mangrove tree, ancient healing tomes spread open before her. The light of a lumos sphere above her too. Allow her reading light that casts shifting shadows across the mangrove roots, illuminating the careful, deliberate turns of her serpentine head as she studied the intricate script. The texts contained the wisdom of ages spells, poultices, and the subtle art of mending wounds that extended beyond human understanding. She had been deep in thought, absorbed in unraveling the mysteries of magical regeneration, when the faint disturbance in the wards alerted her to a familiar presence. Harry entered, his footsteps light but unhurried, betraying no sign of exertion. His armor had long since dissipated, leaving only the faint shimmer of residual magic clinging to his scent. Still, even without the gleaming plates of battle, the evidence of his activities was plain to see. Scuffed robes, faint bruises forming along his arms, and that ever-present glint of untamed energy in his eyes. Nagini did not need arms to express herself. The slow lift of her great head and the sharp flick of her tongue spoke volumes. "You've been playing rough again," she remarked, her voice carrying the lilt of a chiding mother rather than a true reprimand. Harry only grinned, shrugging as if it were inevitable. "They have to learn somehow. Can't expect them to keep up if they don't train properly." Nagini exhaled sharply, the serpentine equivalent of a snort. "Humans break more easily than you." You were raised by the jungle's law, they were not. He rolled his shoulders as if shaking off her concerns, then added with a smirk, Amon's doing fine. He's the only one who can actually keep up. Nearly managed to wind me this time. A flicker of amusement danced in Nagini's emerald eyes. Nearly. She let the word hang in the air before shifting her great coils, the faint scrape of scales against stone filling the space between them. Go, bathe. You stink of sweat and magic. I won't have you tracking filth through the twins' accommodations. Harry huffed in mock offense but did not argue. He knew better. Nagini's voice followed him as he turned to leave. Afterward, find your favorite giant teddy bat. No doubt she's waiting. His laugh echoed through the chamber as he disappeared down the corridor. Nagini watched him go, shaking her great head in quiet exasperation. Boys would be boys, even those raised by serpents. Albus Dumbledore sat in his office, illuminated by the flickering glow of enchanted candlelight, meticulously finalizing tea. Preparations for the 1994-1995 Hogwarts school year. His expansive wooden desk was strewn with parchment, some awaiting his signature while others lay neatly stacked, organized for easy reference. With a precise flick of his wand, a self-writing quill dipped itself into an ornate inkwell and set to work, its delicate scratching filling the quiet room. His sharp blue eyes scanned the Hogwarts financial ledgers, ensuring that the school's finances were in impeccable order. Tuition revenue, supply expenditures, faculty salaries, and the upkeep of the castle's intricate magical infrastructure. LL required scrupulous oversight to guarantee the smooth operation of the institution. Despite the meticulous nature of the task, his mind remained attuned to the broader concerns of the upcoming academic year. He glanced at the agenda for the prefect selection meeting, an annual assembly where the heads of houses convened to appoint new fifth-year prefects. The annual deliberations would focus on identifying candidates who had exhibited qualities of leadership, discipline, and sound moral judgment over their first 4 years. Although the meeting itself was routine, its implications were significant. Prefects played an integral role in maintaining discipline and guiding the younger students through their formative years at Hogwarts. As evening deepened, the time for the faculty meeting arrived. Rising from his chair, Dumbledore waved his hand, sending the remaining parchments gracefully into their designated slots within the grand wooden filing cabinets lining the office. Adjusting his half-moon spectacles, he made his way to the staff room, where the assembled faculty awaited his arrival. The meeting commenced with standard discussions regarding lesson plans, curriculum revisions, and scheduled events for the year. Then, Dumbledore addressed the primary subject of the gathering, the Triwizard Tournament. As you are all aware, he began, his tone measured yet authoritative, this year. Hogwarts has been granted the privilege of hosting the Triwizard Tournament, a venerable tradition that has remained dormant for over a century. The Ministry of Magic has expended considerable effort to ensure the safety of all participants, and I trust each of you will lend your expertise in preparing for the arrival of our esteemed guests. A low murmur swept through the room as the professors exchanged looks of understanding. The logistical and security challenges associated with hosting such a prestigious event were considerable, and each faculty member understood the magnitude of their responsibilities. Professor McGonagall, ever pragmatic, was the first to speak. I presume our competitors will be students from Durmstrang Institute and Beauxbaton's Academy. Dumbledore's EY's twinkled with quiet amusement as he shook his head. That would be the reasonable assumption, he acknowledged, allowing a moment of suspense to pass before continuing. However, this year's competition will not include Durmstrang or Beauxbaton's. The announcement elicited an immediate stir among the faculty. Several professors exchanged surprised glances, and Professor Flitwick raised a curious eyebrow. Then, who will be joining us? Dumbledore leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers. This year, we shall welcome competitors from Guanium Academy of Sorcery and Rentier Cleveland University. A moment of stunned silence followed before the room erupted into a chorus of surprised whispers and speculative discussion. Guanium Academy, Professor Sprooferoing, that is rather unexpected, given their previous hesitations regarding European magical competitions. And Rentier Cleveland, Professor Snape's voice remained cool, yet tinged with intrigue. I was under the impression at American magical institutions preferred to remain insular regarding international contests. Dumbledore nodded. Indeed, Their participation required delicate negotiations. However, both institutions have formally agreed to take part, and we must prepare accordingly. This tournament will be unlike any iteration before it. The ensuing discussion shifted toward logistical considerations, accommodations for visiting delegations, reinforced security measures, and the advanced magical preparations necessary to host such distinguished guests. Though the unexpected selection of competing schools had caught many by surprise, one fact remained indisputable: this year at Hogwarts promised to be an extraordinary one.